monster. Good morning, madam. How are you?
I'm fine because I can make a very tough speech concerning the phone numbers.
Okay, okay.
To keep you very humble.
Everything under control?
Yes. And Titus also. It's only when we speak we don't wear it.
Okay.
Speakers list is here.
I was really hoping that you won't get your speech, that you had to do it out of that.
Good morning, President.
Morning, Mr. President. We are all presidents, so good to see you.
Fully packed political. I couldn't sit, so I left.
Zalk,
You have always
I know
by me.
I had, but I said they don't need
the amendments, how did they go?
Very well.
Yeah?
Very well. Smooth. Nothing surprising.
Okay. And do we have most of the amendments adopted unanimously?
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. We will have a very substantial decrease in workload.
maybe no, it's totally different. This is so you did the regular.
Yes.
Then I show you. No, I don't. Mine glasses. Yes, please.
Dear colleagues, the sitting is open. I remind members that in view of the high numbers of members physically participating in this part session and the increase in the capacity of the chamber, wearing a mask is compulsory. Speakers are allowed to take off their mask when taking the floor. I also remind members taking part remotely that they should take part in proceedings from a quiet location and should not speak from cars, trains, or other modes of transport. Then, referring to the debate that we had yesterday on the progress report, I remind all members that members of the Assembly shall behave in a cautious, polite and respectful manner towards each other and towards the President of the Assembly or to any other person who is presiding. They shall refrain from action that may disrupt proceedings. This includes the use of symbols, signs and gestures that disrespect other members or cause disruption. Therefore, I invite you again to observe these rules during the sittings today and the rest of the part session. As I said in January, I prefer this assembly to be more an agora than an arena. We have to take care that we act politely towards each other, how different our opinions might be. So from now refrain from using signs and signals or expressions or words that may be insulting for others. This morning, the agenda calls for the election of one judge to the European Court of Human Rights in respect of Ukraine. The list of candidates and biographical notices and the opinion of the Committee on the Election of Judges are to be found in documents 15485 and 15500 addendum 2. The elections will take place by individual electronic secret ballot voting using the remote system. In accordance with the rules of procedure, each political group has appointed a teller. The tellers are, on behalf of the EPP group, Madam Katja Dekanovic from Georgia, on behalf of the Socialist group, Madam Clotilda Bushka from Albania, on behalf of the ALDE group, Mr. Julian Bulai from Romania, on behalf of the ECDA group, Mr. Alberto Ribolla from Italy, and on behalf of the UEL group, Mr. Paul Gavin, Ireland. At 3 p.m. the poll will close. The results will be announced during this afternoon's session. For the first round of voting, an absolute majority of votes is required. If a second round is to be organized, it will take place tomorrow morning, and I now declare the ballot open. Dear colleagues, the next item of business this morning is the debate on the report titled Beyond the Lisbon Treaty, Strengthening the Strategic Partnership between the Council of Europe and the European Union. You find it in document 15495. It will be presented by our dear colleague, Mr. Titus Kolatian, on behalf of the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy. In order to finish by 12 p.m., I will interrupt the list of speakers at about 11:50 to allow time for the reply and the vote on the draft resolution and the draft recommendation. And now I call Mr. Kolatian, the rapporteur, and you have 7 minutes, Titus. You have the floor.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, when I started preparing this report, I intended to take stock of the cooperation between the Council of Europe and the European Union and suggest areas where our interaction could be improved. The Russian Federation's large-scale aggression against Ukraine has added urgency and relevance to this report. Using the expression strategic partnership to describe the cooperation between the Council of Europe and the European Union has never been more meaningful than in the current historical context. On synergy while avoiding duplications. Following the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, the European Union expanded its activities into areas covered by the mandate of the Council of Europe, touching upon democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. This increased the focus on these values in EU member states domestically. It also positioned the European Union as a key player and a strong promoter of those values internationally through its external action. Given this overlapping of competencies, however, the Lisbon Treaty made it even more crucial to avoid duplication and the risk of diverging standards between the two organizations. Thanks to an intense political and technical dialogue, these risks have been largely averted. But it is only through synergy that the two organizations can enhance each other's impact and tackle the challenges confronting Europe. On democracy, in order to reinforce the democratic security of European states, it has become imperative to reverse the backsliding of democracy, protect the integrity of democratic processes against external interference, and innovate the functioning of democratic institutions, including through greater citizen engagement. The choice of a new push for democracy as one of its 6 political priorities and the adoption of the Democracy Action Plan show a clear understanding of this need on the part of the European Commission. Similarly, the Conference for the Future of Europe, the first exercise of participatory democracy at the EU level, has explored new ways to involve ordinary citizens in the EU decision-making process. On rule of law, strong and resilient democracies are based on the scrupulous respect of the rule of law. Since the entry into force of the Treaty of Lisbon, the EU has introduced a large range of tools to tackle threats to the rule of law in its member states. Given that all EU member states are also Council of Europe member states, the active involvement of the Council of Europe in the preparation of the EU Rule of Law report is certainly to be welcome. The European Union should rely even more extensively on the Council of Europe's expertise, benchmarking, and monitoring findings in this area. On human rights, by establishing the European Union's legal personality, the Lisbon Treaty created a solid basis for developing a coherent legal space in Europe, enabling the European Union to adhere to Council of Europe's conventions and participate in Council of Europe mechanisms. The Treaty of Lisbon also made EU accession to the European Convention on Human Rights a legal obligation, therefore creating the basis for the creation of a single human rights space on the European continent. The Assembly should welcome the resumption in 2020 of the negotiations on the European Union's accession to the European Convention on Human Rights and call for this process to be pursued with resolve. Since the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty, the European Union has acceded to the Council of Europe Convention on Prevention of Terrorism and its additional protocol, and participates in different capacities in several partial agreements, including GRECO. The Assembly should invite the Council of Europe and the European Union to further strengthen and formalize their legal cooperation with a view to avoiding the application of efforts and preventing the emergence of diverging legal standards. On enlargement and multilateralism. Since the entry into force of the Treaty of Lisbon, the geopolitical context has evolved with considerable power shifts and the emergence of new global players. Relations between major powers are increasingly confrontational and unilateralist. Multilateral rules and organizations are being openly challenged. These trends had already been visible for some time. The COVID-19 pandemic amplified some of them, in addition to heightening socio-economic tensions and increasing global inequalities. The Russian Federation's aggression has added another layer of complexity to the current situation. In the light of the new geopolitical context, it should be recognized that the prospect of EU membership represents a factor of stability in Europe. At the same time, the Council of Europe should redouble its efforts to help its member states wishing to join the European Union to make tangible and measurable progress towards meeting the necessary criteria. The Assembly should also reaffirm the conviction that multilateralism based on common rules is the best way to preserve peace and stability, and resolutely supports the drive for the European Union to have a stronger voice on the international stage. In conclusion, colleagues, in the face of the new dividing line in Europe, the strategic partnership between the Council of Europe and the European Union must be the anchor of European stability. In the face of violent threats to the rules-based world order, our common attachment to the values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law must be the compass to guide our actions to deliver prosperity, democratic security, and peace for European citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rapporteur. In the debate, I now first call on behalf of the political groups, the first speaker, on behalf of the ECDA group, Mr. Christopher Shope from the United Kingdom. Chris, you have the floor.
Mr. President, can I first of all congratulate the rapporteur on his report? And can I say that I wish to address the issue of the European Union's treaty obligations under the Lisbon Treaty to accede to the European Convention on Human Rights. I strongly support the sentence in paragraph 6 of the draft resolution, which reads, "The Assembly reaffirms its confidence that accession will help guarantee coherence and consistency between EU law and the Convention system and lead to a single legal space in which also the EU is subjected to the European Convention on Human Rights." My concern, however, is that that doesn't seem to fit in with the opinion of the European Court of Justice, which was delivered in 2014, because that opinion of the European Court of Justice was that the agreement, which had been drafted in a lot of detail, as you will know, Mr. President, is not compatible with Article 6 or with Protocol 8 of the European Union. And the reasons that the European Court of Justice took that line was, and it says, it is liable adversely to affect the specific characteristic and the autonomy of EU law. But the autonomy of our own national laws is always affected if we are subject to the European Convention on Human Rights. That is something that we take into account, and that shows that the European Court and the European Convention are superior to domestic law. It doesn't seem, however, that the European Union or its Court of Justice is prepared to accept that. The opinion at paragraph 258 in conclusion goes on to say it does not preclude the possibility of disputes between member states or between member states and the EU concerning the application of the European Convention within the scope being brought before the ECHR. Well, jolly good thing. Surely those disputes should be subject to coming before the European Court of Human Rights if they offend against that convention. And one can envisage a situation, Mr. President, where you might have, for example, a dispute between Hungary or between Poland and the European Commission on whether or not articles which they have passed in their own democratically elected parliaments are consistent with EU law. So the point I wish to make is that I'm concerned that when these negotiations resume, that we should not throw in the towel, and that we as an organisation should insist that the European Union be subject to the Convention rather than being above the law, which seems to be the intent of the European Court of Justice.
Thank you, Chris. Now I call in the debate on behalf of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats in Europe, Mr. Dara Callery from Ireland. Dara, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I too want to commend the rapporteur on his work and his committee. It is interesting, Mr. President, to notice that this report was commissioned on the 12th of April 2019. And in the words of W.B. Yeats, all has changed, and changed utterly. A worldwide pandemic that we've not had the opportunity to reflect how that impacted and how people's lived experiences of that has impacted on our democracy. And now we have the war on Ukraine and the invasion of Ukraine. And I think the change, that utter change, requires reflection on our part as an institution of the Council of Europe that predates the European Union, as an institution based on human rights, based on democracy, based on the rule of law, on those three key pillars. We need to reflect on our role, on how we become more strategically impatient as opposed to strategically patient in the exercising of that role and in the exercising of our relationship with the European Union. We must ensure that those core values are reflected in all of our work, and that we become the body that is strategically impatient around human rights, that is strategically impatient around democracy, and is strategically impatient around the rule of law. In the document, there is reflection that the democracy depends on the respect of the rule of law, and yes, it does, but it also depends on other issues too. The overnight news about the acquiring by one individual of the world's biggest social media platform should be a warning to us that social media is changing the way democracy is ruled, and social media and the impact of social media on democracy is something that we all need to be aware to and aware of, and its impact on human rights and on rule of law. We need, Mr. President, to be strategically impatient, because our identity as an institution and as an organisation is being dwarfed by that of the EU. The EU's move into the human rights sphere under the Lisbon Treaty is impacting and threatening our very raison d'etre. And yesterday, you saw their intent to move into Ukraine to investigate war crimes in line with the International Criminal Court. There was no involvement of this institution in doing that. So there is a requirement on us to build on strategic partnership, absolutely, but to reflect the changed reality and to actually have an ambition and a belief in this organisation and in the reasons that this organisation was established in the years following World War II that are relevant today and even more relevant than they were on the 12th of April 2019. So, Mr. President, it's a time for reflection on our part. Are we serious about the mandate that we have as an institution? Are we proud enough about that mandate? And are we going to be strategically impatient? Are we going to be the thorn in the side that defends human rights, that defends democracy, that defends the rule of law, and not acquiesce to others? We can lead out on this, and we should. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Darren. Next in the debate, I'll call Mr. Paul Gavin from Ireland on behalf of the UEL Group. Paul, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of the United European Left, I want to congratulate the rapporteur for a very well thought out and detailed report on steps to take towards strengthening the strategic partnership between the Council of Europe and the European Union. The rapporteur makes a number of excellent proposals. I particularly welcome his call on the EU to pursue with resolve the negotiations aimed at achieving EU accession to the European Convention on Human Rights. Notwithstanding the legal challenges involved, we've been waiting far too long for this process to be completed, and I want to be clear on behalf of my group that the European Court of Human Rights must take precedence in relation to the European Court of Justice. It has to be both good and necessary that the EU is subjected to the same international oversight on human rights as its 27 member states. It's also essential that citizens will be able to challenge the EU's actions before the European Court of Human Rights. Whilst the rapporteur speaks of shared values, this maxim does not always hold true. When we consider the actions of Frontex on illegal pushbacks, the appalling slide towards a policy of fortress Europe that still applies to so many human beings trying to access the European Union, and the disgraceful policy of continuing to fund the Libyan Coast Guard and, by association, complicity in crimes against humanity, the need to be able to hold the EU as a legal entity to account has never been greater. I also want to welcome the call on the European Union to accede to the European Social Charter. At the moment, we have an à la carte approach within the European Union to the Social Charter, and that is to the detriment of workers' rights in particular. And I also want to acknowledge the call for the Council of Europe to engage with the follow-up to the Conference on the Future of Europe. The 39 recommendations from the citizens' assemblies involved in the latter project make clear the need to make the European Union a better place for all of its citizens. In particular, the clear call to give the Charter of Fundamental Rights legal enforcement. We need to see values and rights protected through the rule of law. We need to see fundamental legal change to ensure that people who work for a living can earn a living. The European Union needs not only to speak about its values, but put them into practice. Right now, across Europe, working people are hurting. Our frontline workers who literally kept the lights on across Europe throughout the COVID pandemic are now facing a cost of living crisis. In my own country, Ireland, we still don't have a legal right to collective bargaining. We need to see a fundamental sea change, a fundamental shift from the European Union to emphasise the Social Charter, to emphasise workers' rights, to enable workers to build a better future, because surely that must be the key aim of the European Union. So I welcome this report and I welcome the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Next in the debate, I call on behalf of the group of the Socialists, Democrats and Greens, Mr. Ahmed Yildiz. You have the floor from Turkey. You have the floor, Ahmed.
Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished members of the Assembly, on behalf of our group, allow me first and foremost to express my sincere appreciation to the rapporteur of this report we are reviewing today. It is very timely. It is timely because all over our continent, from the west to the east, we are facing an increasing backsliding of democracy. The integrity of democratic processes are being undermined, good functioning of democratic institutions are being prohibited, and all these are taking place not only through interventions to our institutions and values from within, but now through external intervention. Let us be clear. The Russian Federation's ongoing war of aggression against Ukraine is not an issue related to Russia's security. It's an attempt to prohibit the development and expansion of democratic values in a wider geography in Europe. That is the essential reason why our institutions have to enhance cooperation in order to further defend democratic security. Council of Europe is the first post-Second World War organization to prioritize democracy, human rights, and the rule of law for human dignity. It is also obvious that the European Union, particularly after the entry into force of the Treaty of Lisbon, expanded its activities into areas covered by the statutory mandate of the Council of Europe. Hence, membership and compliance with our core values in the Council of Europe is essentially a prelude to membership in the European Union. There is an apparent overlapping of competencies between the two organizations. That is the reason why strengthening dialogue and cooperation between these two pillars of democracy in Europe is crucial. The draft resolution and the draft recommendation underline the development of strategic partnership between Council of Europe and the European Union based on our common values. The entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty has become a new and stronger impetus for the European Union and placed democracy and the respect of the rule of law and human rights at the forefront of EU policies. Now, there are greater opportunities for cooperation between our organizations. We have to enhance our political dialogue and legal cooperation through increased joint programs. Here, it is important to underline two very important aspects of further cooperation. EU accession to the European Convention on Human Rights is increasingly becoming a necessity for harmonization of legal procedures to avoid creating a two-tier or two-speed protection system. Given the circumstances rapidly unfolding in our continent, this should be a priority. Secondly, Council of Europe is facing a challenge to its budget, particularly after the cessation of Russia's membership. It is therefore important for the European Union to consider making non-earmarked contributions to the Council of Europe budget. These are all skillfully mentioned in the draft resolution. We support the report, the resolution, and the recommendations and favor a solid and very strong approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Now, last speaker on behalf of the political groups is Madam Ria Oomen-Ruijten from the Netherlands. Ria, you have the floor on behalf of the EPP group.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, colleagues, and also rapporteur. I appreciate that today we can discuss this report. It's a turbulent time where a member state is affected by an aggressive attack and where citizens in the neighborhood of that member state of Ukraine, they live in fear. Turbulent times, and I put it mildly. And therefore, it's more than ever needed that EU and the Council of Europe cooperate, because an intense cooperation is in the interest not only from both institutions, but in the interest of the European citizens. It is up to EU and Council of Europe to reverse the backsliding of democracy. We have to protect the integrity of democratic processes, and it's more than ever needed to promote and monitor the rule of law. President, I am in favor of the report, but I can't deny that when we are speaking about ourselves, that we have to be much more proud on what we can do together. And it's up to us, not asking the EU to do something, but it's up to us, to the Council, to you, President, in your contacts with the President of the European Parliament, to the Secretary General, to have contacts with the President of the European Commission, to invite in our debates commissioners, to do something now on the legal force in the Treaty of Lisbon to enter for the European Union our Treaty for the Human Rights. President, we have to do something. Be not too humble and look over the proposals for the conference of the future. I can't find something in for this Council of Europe. So we have to act, but act in a way that we are self-sufficient. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ria. And I indeed intend to meet as soon as possible with the new President of the European Parliament to discuss these items, of course. Now we continue the debate with the rest of the speakers list. First, I call Madam Zita Gurmai from Hungary. Zita, you have the floor. Microphone, please.
So can we start again? Thank you very much. So, lovely to see you all. So strong and resilient democracies are based on the scrupulous respect of rule of law. The statement of the report brings much needed truth as we look forward to deal with the continuous line of crisis we experienced in the past decades, especially after the past few years. We didn't even wake up from the adverse effect of the coronavirus pandemic had on our life and rights when Russia started an unlawful war against Ukraine, not just simply violating certain human rights of the Ukrainian people, but outright committing genocide in Ukraine, not respecting the most fundamental human rights, the right to life and human dignity. The Russian aggression shows that we are in dire need to strengthen international cooperation and solidarity, because the moment we take a step back and feel satisfied with anything less than the absolute scrupulous respect of the rule of law, we immediately end up with aggressors who seek to destroy the entire web of protection supposedly granted by the rule of law. If we allow such people to operate undisturbed, or if we allow them to operate without decisive steps against them, we all will lose of law and with it democracy as we know it today. Therefore, the call proposed in the report 12 is especially welcome. Hungary stands as an example for everyone to show what happens if decisive steps are not made. Hungary has made a hybrid regime that is ready to use taxpayers' money to spread lie and misinformation about its political opponent, or to take over and spread foreign Russian propaganda justifying the Russian genocide in Ukraine. However, the recent elections in Europe have shown that these practices do not stop at the borders. The Hungarian governing party and its associated financial circles has actively supported other candidates and political parties in Europe too, in case of their victory, ensure political alliances with ideological partners. These circles help finance the campaign of Marine Le Pen in France and Janez Janša in Slovenia. We should not be mistaken. A political alliance like this will actively work on wearing down and destroying the rule of law throughout Europe, to ensure that no legal barriers can exist for them, to ensure that they can use their powers if any way they want. The goals set out in 12 are goals we need to tirelessly work to ensure, and while doing so, we cannot be satisfied with partial results, because partial results are no real result. For those who wish to work around the rule of law, partial results are only minor obstacle and challenge they might even enjoy. Because of this, we drastically need to strengthen the cooperation and international solidarity on the field of highlighting in this report, or we lose them forever. As a former member of parliament, I fully support your report, and I really believe that it's super important. Thank you, and it's highly appreciated.
Thank you, Zita. Next in the debate, le prochain orateur est M. François Calvet de la France. François, vous avez la parole.
He's not connected, apparently. Shall we try the next?
As Mr. Calvet is not yet connected, we will first go to the next speaker, and that is Mr. John Howell from the United Kingdom. John, you have the floor.
Maybe you can say.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to start this by looking at this not from the perspective of being in any way hostile to the EU, because I am not. But I want to look at this to look at this from the perspective of being pro the Council of Europe. And I hope that we are all pro the Council of Europe. And I would congratulate the rapporteur on producing this report and for setting out quite a good balance when he addresses the issues. And as he points out, the Treaty of Lisbon already contains references to democracy, to the rule of law, and to human rights. And it would be very interesting to see what use the Treaty of Lisbon has made of those elements within it. I am happy for this Assembly to work with the EU in taking forward cooperation. But I would just suggest that we need to be very clear before we engage and develop that cooperation further, exactly what is in it for each of the parties and what we expect to get out of it. Now, we need to do that because not all members of this Assembly are members of the EU. And here, there is a lot of concern, of course, to work for peace and stability, and we can do that together. But there are some things, whether we believe in greater integration or not, that we need to make sure that we understand who is responsible for what. We are an assembly of individual countries and not of international multilateral organizations. And I think that that is something that needs to be borne in mind, and I'll come on to in the context of the human rights issues, because there I do not think that special measures should be taken to allow the EU to have an easier passage into the convention. It should follow what everyone else has followed. I do think it is very useful for Europe as a whole to have one system of human rights, but that system has to be the convention and has to be what we all believe in. Now, that means that we need to understand what we are responsible for. Yes, we're responsible for human rights, but we're also responsible for democracy and the rule of law. And as the Turin conference later in the year will show, that is something that this Council needs to develop in order to address the needs of the future.
Thank you, John. Prochain orateur est Monsieur François Calvet de la France. François, vous avez la parole.
Oui, vous m'entendez? Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues, je remercie notre collègue pour son rapport qui dresse un panorama très complet des enjeux du partenariat stratégique entre le Conseil de l'Europe et l'Union européenne. Le traité de Lisbonne devait marquer une étape majeure en prévoyant expressément l'adhésion de l'Union européenne à la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme. Pourtant, plus de 12 ans après l'entrée en vigueur du traité de Lisbonne, le 1er décembre 2009, l'Union européenne n'a toujours pas adhéré à la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme. Les négociations sont en cours et je forme le vœu qu'elles aboutissent enfin, car les droits fondamentaux forment une partie de l'identité européenne. Nous venons encore de le voir tout récemment avec la décision de la Commission européenne d'enclencher une procédure à l'égard de la Hongrie. Or, si je reconnais que les cours de Strasbourg et de Luxembourg entretiennent de bonnes relations et que l'article 52 de la Charte des droits fondamentaux de l'Union européenne prévoit un mécanisme de coordination entre les deux ordres juridiques, il me semble qu'il faut aller au bout de la démarche et appliquer pleinement le traité de Lisbonne. Au-delà de ce point, je partage l'analyse de notre rapporteur concernant la possibilité pour l'Union européenne d'adhérer à certaines conventions du Conseil de l'Europe. J'observe qu'elle a signé, mais pas encore ratifié, la Convention d'Istanbul. Enfin, au regard des démarches d'élargissement et des relations avec les pays du partenariat oriental, il me semble nécessaire d'approfondir encore la coopération entre le Conseil de l'Europe et l'Union de l'Europe, notamment dans le contexte nouveau qui a été déjà signalé, géopolitique que nous connaissons, afin que nous soyons en mesure de défendre au mieux nos valeurs communes. Je soutiens donc pleinement le rapport qui nous a été présenté.
Merci à vous, François. Prochaine oratrice est Madame Nicole Trist de la France. Nicole, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Monsieur le rapporteur, chers collègues, effectivement, l'organisation plus récente que le Conseil de l'Europe, l'Union européenne, joue désormais un rôle à la fois complémentaire mais aussi déterminant pour la promotion des droits de l'homme, l'état de droit et les démocraties sur notre continent. Le traité de Lisbonne a de ce point de vue ouvert une nouvelle ère dans l'histoire de l'Union. Le partenariat stratégique qui unit notre organisation à l'Union européenne depuis le mémorandum d'accord de 2007 repose en fait sur 3 piliers à mon sens. Le premier, c'est le dialogue politique, qui s'est intensifié de manière importante depuis maintenant 2 ans. Je regrette néanmoins que ce dialogue se déroule presque exclusivement au niveau de la Commission européenne et du secrétariat général du Conseil de l'Europe, et non à l'échelon parlementaire. Il me semble que notre Assemblée et le Parlement européen ont beaucoup à se dire et que leurs expériences respectives peuvent mutuellement leur servir dans l'exercice de leur mission. Deuxième pilier, c'est la coopération juridique qui s'est renforcée depuis plusieurs mois. L'illustration, bien sûr, la plus éclatante est la relance des négociations pour l'adhésion de l'Union européenne à la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme, qui avait été bloquée d'ailleurs par la Cour européenne du Luxembourg en 2014 et qui a été relancée grâce notamment au président Juncker. Alors bien sûr, on peut se féliciter de cette relance. Néanmoins, je pense, comme l'orateur précédent, qu'en plus, il faudrait que l'Union européenne puisse adhérer également à la Charte sociale européenne ou à la Convention d'Istanbul, par exemple. Enfin, le dernier pilier de ce partenariat concerne les programmes de coopération entre notre organisation et l'Union européenne. L'an passé, cette dernière a financé les actions du Conseil de l'Europe à hauteur de plus de 207 millions d'euros. C'est donc le plus grand contributeur concernant les ressources extra-budgétaires, puisqu'il s'agit de 57%. Cela dit, on ne peut se permettre d'agir n'importe comment. Il faut que l'Union européenne et le Conseil de l'Europe tiennent compte l'une de l'autre, déjà. Et puis ensuite, il faut également, puisqu'elles s'intéressent toutes les deux sur les mêmes points, comme je le disais, des démocraties, de l'état de droit et des droits humains, il faut éviter les duplications de moyens, les gaspillages d'énergie, et il faut plutôt une coopération intelligente et un travail de concert. Bien sûr, personne ne peut perdre de vue que les ressorts géographiques de l'Union européenne et du Conseil de l'Europe ne coïncident pas. Pour cette raison, l'Union doit se servir des acquis du Conseil sans chercher à en influencer l'action. Telle est justement, à mon sens, la signification que nous devons collectivement donner à l'approfondissement du partenariat stratégique qui les lie. En tout cas, je remercie notre rapporteur pour son travail de qualité et son exposé très clair, et je voterai les textes qui seront soumis à cet effet. Merci.
Merci à vous, Nicole. Next in the debate, I'll call Mr. Ahmed Yildiz from Turkey. Ahmed, you have the floor.
Mr. President, dear colleagues, I begin by congratulating the rapporteur for preparing this comprehensive report. Indeed, we had comprehensive and meaningful discussions, thanks to him, in the committees. Since its creation, Council of Europe has become a pioneer among international organizations on democracy, human rights, rule of law, particularly on the European continent. In this respect, precedence of our organization and its benchmarking role with all institutions and mechanisms which accumulated over 70 years should be highlighted once again, as Titus did in the report. On the other hand, two organizations have facing significant challenges in recent years. Strengthening relations with the EU, especially with the European Parliament, and enhancing the dialogue with the European decision makers will benefit us all, considering our common challenges and goals. In this context, it is important to avoid duplication, especially this is very important, duplication of work and fragmentation of standards. This is essentially a problem in many organizations. Therefore, EU's accession to the European Court of Human Rights is of central importance, and I believe that it should remain at the forefront in our relations with the EU. With this accession, it is possible to achieve full and coherent human rights protection in Europe. Moreover, actions of the EU and its bodies will be subject to control and monitoring mechanisms. It is important to achieve this objective without creating any black holes or gray zones. We should be aware that any rush for a swift action and making unduly concessions in favor of the EU in order to ultimately reach its goal in the Lisbon Treaty will undermine the overarching role of our organization and its values. This will increase the feeling of double standards among non-member states. So I would like to share my belief that EU should participate to the European Court of Human Rights on the basis of equal obligations like other parties to the Convention, not to undermine our system. In sum, in our cooperation with the EU and the European Parliament, we should not lose sight of the fact that our organization's identity as an independent forum for comprehensive and inclusive political dialogue. I hope our colleagues in the EU, which they are members also here, think the same way. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Ahmed. Next in the debate, I call Mr. Lukas Savikas from Lithuania. Lukas, you have the floor.
Thank you, dear Chair, dear colleagues. There has been a constant cooperation between the Council and the European Union in an attainment and promotion of their common goals and defending democracy, human rights, rule of law throughout the two organizations' existence. This cooperation is underpinned not only by the existence of common goals, but also by experience and specialization of our Council of Europe in these matters. This cooperation is even more necessary in the face of fresh challenges to the rule of law both inside and outside the EU. As Russia's Federation military aggression against Ukraine continues, we must see the continuation and increasement of danger to democratic values and to the importance to promote them. We must reverse the backsliding of democracy and to include greater citizen engagement. And we can see a success of integration of all people in democratic processes right here in Strasbourg, for example, at the Conference for the Future of Europe, where I personally have the honor to be one of the members. European Union and Conference and Council of Europe cooperation has been developed throughout multiple and diverse agreements and joint projects and conditioned by evolution of both organizations. However, in the present state of the European Union, the development is evident that formalizing a more precise, a global partnership agreement would be of great benefit to both organizations. A formal agreement setting forth cooperation goals, Council of Europe bodies involved, timeline for tasks concerning both mechanism pillars will undoubtedly contribute to efficiency and success in both organizations. Therefore, I once again want to thank the rapporteur for an excellent work, and I will be very happy to support it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lukas. Now you are going to listen to Madam Ingrid Skau from Norway. Ingrid, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. And from different angles, the EU and the Council of Europe both work for a strong and united and democratic Europe in peace. This is the common goal of both organizations. The Lisbon Treaty widened the space for closer cooperation towards this goal and strengthened the foundation of enhanced multinational and rules-based cooperation in Europe. As Mr. Koleatan showed, good progress has been made since 2009. But, President, the Russian aggression in Ukraine has demonstrated the most brutal way what can happen when multinational and rule-based cooperation is ignored, simply set aside. It has shown that we cannot rest. We constantly need to protect and strengthen our international organizations and the rules-based multinational cooperation on our continent. It is important, Mr. President, for democratic security and for a peaceful Europe. Europe's resolute and quick response to Russia's aggression clearly demonstrated how strong we can be and what a force we are when we unite. With the most wide-ranging package of sanctions ever, also supported by non-EU member states like Norway, the EU and United Europe responded in an unprecedented way. I therefore urge you all to support this call for a renewed push for strengthening the strategic partnership between the Council of Europe and the EU, a partnership that must be based on the common European values of human rights, democracy and the rule of law, as defined in our Convention on Human Rights. A first step could be included representatives from the EU in the summit of heads of states and government of the Council of Europe member states, as proposed by both Mr. Colletan and Mr. Schwab. This would be a summit to reaffirm the values of democracy, human rights and the rule of law and elaborate a new vision for the organization. The time to do this is now. The core principles of our democratic societies are challenged by the brutality of tyranny, and we are a defining moment in European history. We should not wait. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ingrid. Next in the debate, I call Madam Marina Berenghieri from Italy. Marina, you have the floor.
Grazie, Presidente. I tempi difficili che stiamo vivendo ci chiamano a scelte coraggiose. Gli eventi degli ultimi anni ci hanno dimostrato quanto siano profonde le interdipendenze e quanto sia importante agire insieme per affrontare le sfide che abbiamo davanti. Le grandi transizioni che stiamo vivendo stanno ridisegnando gli scenari globali, al momento per la maggior parte governati da una varietà di interessi quasi esclusivamente nazionali. Perché l'Europa possa essere protagonista del nuovo assetto globale ed essere tra coloro che, in virtù del progetto politico su cui si fonda, hanno il potere di dettare l'agenda, sono necessari cambiamenti e scelte lungimiranti. Ecco, in questo scenario è fondamentale rafforzare il partenariato strategico tra il Consiglio d'Europa e l'Unione Europea, sulla base dei valori condivisi e dell'impegno per la promozione della pace, della sicurezza, della stabilità nel continente europeo e anche nel mondo. Vorrei sottolineare 3 aspetti che ritengo particolarmente importanti. La cooperazione nella stesura sulla relazione annuale dello Stato di diritto aiuterebbe a superare un sistema attualmente troppo sbilanciato sull'aspetto punitivo a favore del meccanismo di accompagnamento e monitoraggio per ogni singolo Paese, supportando ogni Stato con gli strumenti propri del Consiglio d'Europa a compiere progressi ed evitando di avere come unico strumento il sistema sanzionatorio e scongiurando l'esclusione dal diritto di voto. La seconda, il sostegno al multipolarismo. Un partenariato rafforzato tra Consiglio d'Europa e Unione Europea su questo aspetto può aiutarci ad essere punto di riferimento nel mondo per la costruzione di società basate su un modello sociale che si fonda sullo Stato di diritto. Infine, il ruolo importante e positivo che potrebbe avere il Consiglio d'Europa nell'ambito di un dialogo e concertazione strutturale con l'Unione Europea nei processi di allargamento. Tutti i Paesi che hanno chiesto di far parte dell'Unione Europea fanno parte del Consiglio d'Europa e ne condividono valori, principi e statuto. Un coinvolgimento dell'Assemblea nelle attività interparlamentari, penso in particolare con i Paesi dei Balcani occidentali, potrebbe essere particolarmente utile a sbloccare un percorso di adesione che ormai ha superato qualunque tempo accettabile di attesa. Concludo ringraziando in modo particolare il relatore per l'importante lavoro che ha svolto e mi auguro che possa essere un contributo decisivo per arrivare presto a decisioni che vedano le istituzioni europee sempre più unite nella difesa dei valori su cui si fondano. Grazie.
Grazie, Marina. Next in the debate, I now call Mr. Reinhold Lopatka from Austria. Reinhold, you have the floor.
Dear President, dear colleagues, first of all, I want to congratulate the rapporteur for his holistic report. And I think after the exclusion of Russia from the Council of Europe and the invasion of Ukraine, we have a new stage. And this raises numerous questions about the future strategic orientation of the Council of Europe. And here it is very important to have this topic today on our agenda. And it's also important that in May in Turin, the ministerial meeting will also discuss this issue. Among strategic partnership between the Council of Europe and the European Union, it is important to promote our values, but also security and peace in all our member countries, and to support worldwide a rule-based and a value-based multilateralism. All this is under threat in these days. And if we want to bring the European Union closer to the Council of Europe, I am absolutely in favor of EU accession to the European Convention on Human Rights. And I think this is very important, that citizens will be able to challenge the EU actions before the European Court on Human Rights. For me, this accession is a key question for our future work. And I also support that the EU consider accession to the Convention on Preventing and Combating Violence against Women and Domestic Violence, that this Istanbul Convention should be signed by the European Union. And we should use the synergies of the Council of Europe for the accession process on the Western Balkan countries. The best example is here what the Venice Commission is doing for legal reforms. And we should also involve our Parliamentary Assembly in the interparliamentary activities which are set up by the EU in this dialogue with the so-called Eastern Partnership. To bring our colleagues from Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia and Moldova closer to the European Union, and also when we reach this, we bring them closer to the core values of the Council of Europe. So I want to conclude that we should inform more our citizens about our work. I have seen it in the Conference on the Future of Europe. The Council of Europe was not mentioned there. Colleagues said it already. We have to do it, and the members of the Parliament of the European Union should also do it.
Dank u zeer, Herr Lopatka. Next, le prochain orateur est Monsieur Jacques Maire de la France. Jacques, vous avez la parole.
Mesdames et messieurs, chers amis, il y a bien sûr le contexte russe qu'on a évoqué largement, qui pèse sur notre débat. Il y a aussi le contexte national de nos différents pays. Il y a quelques jours, à Paris, en France, où nous avons proclamé les élections, avec plus de 40% pour une candidate dont le projet institutionnel prévoyait de faire prévaloir le droit national sur le droit européen, qui prévoyait de remettre en cause la Convention européenne des droits de l'homme, la Déclaration universelle des droits de l'homme et du citoyen, et qui avait comme projet d'instituer une discrimination entre les Français et les autres. Ce genre de danger ne s'exprime pas uniquement en France, et la nature de ce projet est d'ailleurs même plus délétère que les actions que nous avons entendues ici ou là de la part de M. Orban ou de M. Morawiecki. Donc, cette question du débat des droits de l'homme est une question qui conditionne l'avenir de toutes nos sociétés. En Allemagne, aux Pays-Bas, en France, ailleurs, ce risque existe. Et quand vous dites aux citoyens, n'est-il pas normal que par référendum, on puisse faire prévaloir la volonté du peuple par rapport à celle des constitutions? N'est-il pas normal de faire prévaloir le droit que nous votons par rapport à celui des étrangers? Les Français, les citoyens européens aujourd'hui l'entendent de façon de plus en plus importante. Donc, il n'y a pas de débat, les amis. Il n'y a pas de débat. Il faut augmenter la capacité que nous avons de nous battre avec tous les moyens à notre disposition. Les moyens dont dispose notre Cour européenne des droits de l'homme sont importants. Le fait de rajouter la capacité de l'Union à être membre, à être adhérente directement, est quelque chose qui a une puissance extrêmement forte, en termes symboliques, en termes d'engagement, en termes de message vis-à-vis des États membres et des États candidats. C'est important. C'est important aussi parce que ça permet de ne pas, je dirais, diluer nos conventions, notre convention, dans un débat d'interprétation et de transposition plus ou moins homogène. Nous avons un corpus, nous le défendons, nous avons besoin d'acteurs, de combattants à nos côtés. Et si l'Union européenne rejoint notre combat, forcément, ce sera important pour nous. Je le dis, nous sommes aujourd'hui sur une situation défensive, nous sommes attaqués dans les élections, nous sommes attaqués dans chacun de nos pays. Il faut que nous passions à l'offensive et ce rapport, merci Tutus, nous permet de passer à l'offensive.
Merci, cher Jacques. Now I call in the debate from Armenia, Mr. Armen Gevorgian. You have the floor, Armen.
Mr. President, the latest developments in the European continent shall make us all think about how can the Council of Europe remain the main institution that is going to be able to defend democracy and democratic values and be the platform for dialogue and development for the European nations. It's the high time for the adoption of our own version of Lisbon Treaty for the Council of Europe, with the due regard to the requirements of the 21st century and the new realities in the world. I think the report and the associated draft attempt to seed division among the Council of Europe's member states on completely political and, in fact, geopolitical grounds. If we proclaim the Council to be, I quote, a benchmark for democracy, human rights and the rule of law in Europe, then we have to be more specific about each member's domestic policies and whether they are genuine democracies. Evaluating states merely by their political and geopolitical aspirations to join other international organizations, such as European Union, does not automatically mean that human rights in these countries are well respected and democracy is the way of life. In other words, geopolitical choices, especially in the current tense international situation, shall not be called a measure of judging the adherence of certain states to democratic standards. Furthermore, so far as the cooperation with the European Union is concerned, I believe we have to collectively think of ways to learn lessons of how the EU treats its members for fallbacks from democratic path. The Council of Europe has to develop such a toolkit. Otherwise, the aspiration of being a benchmark for democracy will be hard to achieve. To conclude, I do not endorse the idea of artificially seeding divisions among member states on geopolitical grounds, and certainly I think that treating each member by their merits in democratic governance and rule of law shall be our guiding star in our aspirations. Thank you.
Thank you, Armen. Next in the debate, I call Mr. Max Lux from Germany. Max, you have the floor. And outside it seems that it's raining.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident. Liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen, wir haben es gerade gehört von dem Kollegen aus Frankreich, aber es gilt nicht nur für Frankreich, es gilt für uns alle. Die Demokratie in Europa ist in Gefahr an den unterschiedlichsten Stellen. Und das ist die Herausforderung, der auch wir uns als Europarat jetzt eindringlich stellen müssen, auch vor dem Hintergrund dieser vergangenen Wahlen, vor dem Hintergrund einer erstarkenden Rechten überall in Europa. Da ist es wichtig, dass wir als Europäerinnen und Europäer zusammenstehen. Es ist aber auch noch etwas Zweites wichtig. Ich glaube, wir werden als europäische Institution nur so wirksam sein, wie wir auch tatsächlich Lebensrealitäten von Menschen verbessern können. Und ich finde, da müssen wir uns schon auch einmal ehrlich fragen, können wir das vermitteln, dass europäische Institutionen Lebensrealitäten verbessern können, wenn die Jugendarbeitslosigkeit in der Europäischen Union bei über 16% liegt? Können wir den Menschen in Europa vermitteln, dass wir Lebensrealitäten verbessern können, wenn über 22% der Menschen von Armut bedroht sind? Ich finde es richtig, dass der Bericht ausdrücklich auf die Sozialcharta hinweist, dass er ausdrücklich auch auf die EU-Grundrechtscharta hinweist, die der Solidarität ein ganzes Kapitel widmet. Und ich finde, es ist auch unsere Aufgabe als Europäerinnen und Europäer dieses Europarates auch gegenüber der Europäischen Union für ein solidarisches Europa einzutreten. Denn europäisch sein ist nichts neben gerecht sein. Europäisch sein heißt gerecht sein, liebe Kolleginnen und Kollegen. Das gilt aber auch für etwas weiteres, für unsere Hauptaufgabe den Schutz von Menschenrechten und Demokratie. Ich weiß nicht, wie es Ihnen geht, aber ich kann hier heute nicht in diesen Hallen, wo wir die Menschenrechte von BürgerInnen aus 46 Mitgliedstaaten verteidigen sollen, stehen, ohne an das gestrige Urteil gegen Herrn Kavala in Istanbul zu denken, der nur aus politischen Gründen, der menschenrechtswidrig lebenslang verurteilt wurde. Ich denke, dass Autokratinnen und Autokraten glauben, sie könnten stärker sein als die Europäische Menschenrechtskonvention. Aber diese Konvention ist mehr als ein Blatt Papier. Sie ist die Garantie für die Menschen aus 46 Mitgliedstaaten, dass sie in Freiheit leben können. Diese Freiheit, sie wird sich nicht unterdrücken lassen. Und es ist unsere Aufgabe, dieses Recht auf Freiheit für alle Bürgerinnen und Bürger zu stärken. Und deshalb wäre es auch ein guter Schritt, wenn die Europäische Union der Europäischen Menschenrechtskonvention beitritt. Danke für diesen sehr guten Bericht.
Danke sehr, Herr Lux. I will later today make a statement on yesterday's verdict on Mr. Kavala. Now I call in a debate from Serbia, Madam Elvira Kovacs. Elvira, you have the floor.
Thank you, distinguished chair, dear colleagues. During the last 2 decades, the Council of Europe has been providing support to Serbia to advance its reform agenda, ensuring compliance with the Council of Europe standards and advancing the European Union accession process. As you all know, Serbia is committed to pursue its integration into the European Union. Therefore, support of the Council of Europe for all key reforms activities in our country, especially those which are part of the negotiation chapter 23 in the field of human and minority rights, are of high importance. On the one hand, having in mind the new context of European security, there is no doubt that it is the right time to reconsidering strategic partnership between the Council of Europe and EU. On the other, having in mind that the Council of Europe and not the European Union is the key actor when the interests of national minorities are at stake, question is whether European institutions are ready to use this unique opportunity to recalibrate its relations with citizens and using all the opportunities available to get back to the fundamentals, human dignity, inclusion, respect, and recognition of minority rights. Respect for and protection of minorities is an important element of the European Union accession criteria. The European standards for the protection of the rights of persons belonging to national minorities are primarily set, as we all know, by the 1995 Council of Europe Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities. The Framework Convention is an indirect benchmark that helps the European Commission to evaluate the implementation of minority rights of potential candidates and candidate states, so it is important to overbridge a lack of coordination in all European institutions that prevents creating synergies between programs and initiatives. Beside the fact that the EU has no adequate legislation about national minority rights, it was expected from the Republic of Serbia, as part of Chapter 23, to adopt a special action plan about the implementation of minority rights, taking into account the recommendations from the third opinion of the Advisory Committee on the Framework Convention on the Protection of National Minorities from 2014, and its 47 recommendations for improving the position of national minorities. It goes without any saying that Serbia is committed to achieve human rights standards stemmed from different sources, such as the mentioned Framework Convention, European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages, Charter of Fundamental Rights, European Convention on Human Rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Elvira. Next on my list is Mr. Francesco Sorbara from Canada, from our observer state. Is he with us? I do not yet see him, so then we go to the next speaker on the list is Madam Arta Bilali Sendeli from North Macedonia. Arta, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, dear colleagues, and dear Rapporteur. This report in a very clear way states that a number of Council of Europe member states, including Albania, North Macedonia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Serbia and Turkey, have expressed their wish to become members of the European Union. Also Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia. Furthermore, the prospect of EU membership represents a factor of stability in Europe, especially in the light of the new geopolitical context. According to this, membership of non-EU countries is of huge importance for the particular region as well as for the whole Europe. There are some criteria to be met, but North Macedonia is facing a dispute with a neighbor country that is becoming very hard to be solved, and this means that we will be waiting till the issue is solved. Regarding the criteria, I am proud to say that a lot of things have been done in North Macedonia. We are a very good example for relaxed interethnic relations and multiculturalism, which are values for both Council of Europe and European Union. Having in mind the situation in North Macedonia, I really feel that we must open the negotiations with the European Union, because I'm afraid that if we don't, the Euroscepticism will increase, and it will not be a good example for our neighbors that also have open questions between them, like Kosovo and Serbia, as well as Bosnia and Herzegovina. We must not allow raising of Euroscepticism in this region, because it will make these countries more attractive for Eastern influence, which is not in the interest of the Europe. At the end, as the report emphasizes, the future of Europe concerns all Europeans, whether they are citizens of EU member states or not. We, all countries from Western Balkans, North Macedonia, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Kosovo, Montenegro, Serbia, Turkey, are Europeans, and our future is and should be only Europe. And the Council of Europe, of course, can help and can make us keep only this integration and only this European influence. Thank you.
Thank you, Arta. Next on the list is Mr. Nikos Tornaritis from Cyprus. Nikos, you have the floor.
Dear President, dear colleagues, I wish to thank Mr. Titus Korlatian and all those who contributed to this report that outlines the great margins of existing cooperation and future prospects between the Council of Europe and the European Union. Certainly, the Council of Europe and the European Union have specific interests and competences, yet they both face the same challenges and share the same values. We must therefore invest in renewed cooperation and a better distribution of competences and responsibilities, so as to avoid duplication and the waste of resources. In this respect, the accession of the European Union to the European Convention on Human Rights will cement this strategic partnership even further and will dissipate any remaining uncertainty and divergence as regards the uniformity and applicability of legal standards in Europe. At the same time, the accession of the European Union to other key treaties and bodies of the Council of Europe should be pursued independently, as it can provide great value added to the Union's policies and priorities. The Istanbul Convention and the European Social Charter are particularly relevant. Additionally, as the report underlines, it is important that the Council of Europe, and particularly the Parliamentary Assembly, strengthens its cooperation and interaction with the European Parliament, especially as regards participatory democracy and enhancing citizens' participation at all levels of governance. Dear colleagues, we need to build and extend our collaboration with the European Union. By doing so, we will reaffirm not only the Council of Europe's relevant as a treaty-based organization, but also our member states' ability to address the challenges ahead and promote peace, security and stability in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, dear Nikos. Now I call in the debate Mr. Alfred here from Switzerland. Alfred, you have the floor.
Dear President, and thank you, Mr. Korlatian, for your very good report. Switzerland is not a member of the European Union, but member of the Council of Europe, and of course for us it is important that we can uphold the values that we share here in this house and in our institution. I was a little bit afraid that because the majority of member states is now a member of the European Union in the Council of Europe, and there was a sort of danger that we would adhere to the European Union and not that the European Union would adhere to the values of the Council of Europe. So I'm happy that this report makes clear, as it is stated, that the European Union should adhere to the European Convention on Human Rights. This is a very important point for me, and that we have one single legal space in Europe. That's also important, and it's very important because, as I mentioned, there are still member states in the Council of Europe that are not member of the European Union and do not wish to be member of the European Union. Therefore, I thank Mr. Korlatian for the clear words, and I also think it's a good idea that we have a close cooperation with the European Union, because in the end, even though we are not a member of the European Union, they have the Fundamental Rights Agency, for example, in Vienna, and they share common views. But I think we should avoid to have a double work. We have the Convention on Human Rights, and we do the work here, and I am happy that the European Union will cooperate in future. And thank you, Mr. Korlatian, for your report, and let's hope that this cooperation will lead to a more peaceful Europe. And we know the atrocities that are going on in Ukraine, and it's very sad that we were not able to avoid this war, and it's a very sad thing, and let's hope and let's pray that this war will find an end soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred. Next in the debate, I call Madam Ahmed Yildiz from Turkey. Zeynep, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear President, dear colleagues, first of all, I would like to thank the rapporteur for his considerable efforts to present us this important report. In recent years, we have all been facing significant challenges. The intensity and the diversity of them are increasing every day. In addition to these continuous challenges, military aggression of Russia against Ukraine puts serious strain on the unity and stability of the European continent. All these challenges require our attention to enhance our cooperation based on effective multilateralism. This multilateralism also needs to strengthen respective roles and competences of international organizations. In the end, global challenges require global response, and regional challenges have to be dealt with regional response with concerted actions. In this respect, enhanced cooperation with other international organizations which we share common values such as EU, OSCE, and OECD are important to tackle these challenges more effectively and resolutely. In this context, I support the report in general and efforts on strengthening the cooperation with the EU. In addition, I would like to touch upon another significant aspect, as already underlined in the report, which is European integration that require close collaboration between two organizations. The EU anchors the main instrument that holds the region. Furthermore, the integration is a crucial element to sustain and strengthen stability and democratic security of Europe, which became more vital considering the current circumstances. In the past, the Council of Europe has contributed significantly to enlargement and deepening of the European Union, and I believe that it is still capable of with its bodies and instruments. Therefore, I would like to say that I particularly support the recommendations in the report regarding the enlargement process, and I share the remarks of the rapporteur that the EU should give a concrete prospect of accession within a reasonable timeline. Dear colleagues, all in all, the Council of Europe, which is founded after the horrors of the war, is still one of the most important actors to maintain peace and stability in the region. To that end, it is not only important, but also imperative to work together with other international organizations, particularly the EU. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Zeynep. Next speaker in our debate will be our good colleague, George Folks from the United Kingdom. You have the floor, George.
Thank you, President, and can I join in the congratulations to my colleague, Socialist colleague Titus, for his excellent report, which I support fully. My colleague from the United Kingdom earlier, John Howell, pointed out the obvious thing that we in the United Kingdom are no longer, sadly, members of the European Union. It's been a tragedy. Brexit has been a tragedy for the United Kingdom. It gets worse and worse, day by day, week by week, month by month. And any country that is thinking of withdrawing should think again. That's why one of the many reasons I welcome the result of the French presidential election. And any countries that are seeking to join the European Union, I'll encourage you to do so. But that's not what the debate is about today. So I'll turn to that. Chris Chope, another of my colleagues from the United Kingdom, earlier said that the European Union must respect human rights, just as the individual countries do. And he's absolutely right on that. But can I remind him of the parable of motes and beams? The United Kingdom in 1998 incorporated effectively the European Convention of Human Rights into our United Kingdom law. That was done by a Labour government. However, there has been backsliding by our present government. David Cameron, in 2006, suggested that the Human Rights Act should be scrapped and wanted a separate British Bill of Rights. And something similar was included in the Tory manifestos of 2010, 2015 and 2019. And now Dominic Raab, our Justice Secretary, most recently on the 5th of October, says the government will overhaul the Human Rights Act 1998 before the next election. That is an entirely retrograde step and something that I hope all of us can oppose. In fact, our joint committee on human rights, all party from both houses of Parliament, said that there was no justification at all for any changes in the law of the United Kingdom in relation to human rights. So I hope that the United Kingdom will continue to be a beacon as far as other countries are concerned, as far as human rights are concerned, and will not change the 1998 law. And we will show the way for other countries and not fall behind, as our current government seems to be suggesting.
Thank you very much, George. Next in the debate, I call Mr. Norbert Kleinwachter from Germany. Norbert, you have the floor.
Werter Herr Präsident, werte Kolleginnen und Kollegen, es ist sehr richtig und wichtig, dass wir heute über das Verhältnis reden zwischen dem Europarat und der Europäischen Union. Unserem Europarat, der seit 1949 die Werte der Demokratie, der Menschenrechte, der Rechtsstaatlichkeit verteidigt. Und auf der anderen Seite der Europäischen Union, wo diese Werte nicht immer in großem Umfang festzustellen sind. Machen wir uns doch mal ganz ehrlich, die Europäische Union hat große Defizite bei der Demokratie. Das EU-Parlament selbst ist undemokratisch. Das Prinzip One Man, One Vote gilt dort nicht. Das ist viel zu weit entfernt von der Willensbildung der Bürger. Die Willensbildung im Parlament ist intransparent und die Gewaltenteilung in der Europäischen Union funktioniert auch nicht mit einem ziemlich kommissionstreuen EuGH. Und das erkennen ja die Mitglieder der Kommission teilweise selbst, versuchen dann mit Experimenten wie der Konferenz zur Zukunft Europas zu hantieren, um neue Wege zu finden, wo dann also auch gar nicht mehr die Bürger, sondern irgendwelche NGOs Entscheidungen treffen sollen, meine Damen und Herren. Auch die Treue der Europäischen Union zu den Menschenrechten muss spätestens dann hinterfragt werden, wenn wir uns ansehen, was so in Bezug auf die Proteste gegen das, was die Regierung so für richtig hielt, anschauen. Die wurden einfach mal niedergeknüppelt, egal ob es sich um Demos gegen die Corona-Politik handelte oder beispielsweise die Bewegung der Gilets jaunes in Frankreich. Von der Leyen hat dort eben nichts getan. Stattdessen hat die EU-Kommission aktiv Programme gegen Meinungsfreiheit aufgelegt. Ich muss Ihnen schon die Frage stellen, wo bei dem Europäischen Aktionsplan für Demokratie die Meinungsfreiheit bleibt, wenn eine freie Meinungsäußerung im Endeffekt mit Infoboxen auf Facebook und Konsorten belegt wird, so nach dem Motto, du kannst zwar deine Meinung äußern, aber wir weisen gleich darauf hin, das ist nicht die richtige. Und auch die EU-Kommission ist für das menschenverachtende System der digitalen Covid-Zertifikate verantwortlich, übrigens ein Instrument, das in den USA aus Menschenrechtsgründen nie eingeführt wurde. Und zuletzt kommen wir zu den Rechtsstaatlichkeitsproblemen. Die Verträge sind das Papier nicht wert, auf dem sie gedruckt sind. Die Verträge werden geschlossen und dann geschlossen ignoriert. Wir sehen das an den Schulden- und Fiskalregeln des Maastricht-Vertrags. Wo sind wir denn noch mit der 60% Schuldenregel vom Bruttoinlandsprodukt? Und wir sehen das eben auch bei dem Vertrag von Lissabon. Der regelt, die Europäische Union muss sich eigentlich der Europäischen Menschenrechtskonvention anschließen, aber sie will das nicht. Sie will das nicht, weil sie sich selbst für supranational hält, das EU-Recht nationalen Demokratien vorgehen, sondern da passt eine externe Bewertung etwa durch den Europäischen Menschenrechtsgerichtshof nicht. Zugegeben, ein solches Urteil zum Zustand der Demokratie, der Menschenrechte und der Rechtsstaatlichkeit der EU müsste vernichtend ausfallen. Und deswegen, Herr Berichterstatter, glaube ich, dass eine strategische Partnerschaft keinen Sinn macht. Die Europäische Union muss sich der Europäischen Menschenrechtskonvention unterwerfen. Und sie darf das nicht unter Zuerkennung einer Staatlichkeit tun, sondern es muss so laufen, die Mitgliedstaaten haben Kompetenzen an die EU abgegeben. Wenn das passiert ist, dann muss über die Mitgliedstaaten hier eine Klagemöglichkeit existieren. Wir müssen das in unseren Regularien umsetzen. Vielen Dank.
Danke sehr, Herr Kleinwachter. Next in the debate is Madam Lysia Vasilenko from Ukraine. Lysia, she is not with us. There you are. Sorry, you have the floor, Lysia.
Thank you, President, and dear colleagues. Indeed, this is an important report we are regarding today. And as the Council of Europe and the European Union are both very crucial mechanisms to promote basic European values, principles and aspirations. Both of these institutions were designed after the Second World War to promote dialogue and cooperation, peace and development, and prevent further wars. Both of these institutions, however, failed, as we are all able to observe during the last 8 years, when Russia first began its aggression against Ukraine, and during the last 2 months, when we were all seeing the evidence of the escalation of that very aggression. Today, it's very important to understand the reasons that led to yet another war in Europe. First of all, the not provoking Russia approach, which was so well implemented in the EU and in the Council of Europe, didn't quite work. And second, the strategic ambiguity towards Ukraine and other democratic states that were aspiring to become EU members also didn't work. Today, it is also important, however, to learn from our past mistakes. First of all, there cannot be any more walls in Europe. This is the first lesson. The second lesson is that there cannot be any spheres of interest, and there cannot be peace and democracy through appeasement of aggressors and autocracies. These are simple lessons. And today also, the Council of Europe and EU leaders must show a unity and a courage. They must reaffirm the EU's mission of promoting peace and freedoms on our continent. And for that, the EU candidate status for which Ukraine is striving must be granted. This will lead to further integration of the EU and the European continent, and would not just be a powerful political symbol for the people of Ukraine, but also a chance to fix past mistakes and step away from unsuccessful policies. Ukraine is a long-standing member of the Council of Europe and has proven on numerous occasions it shares the principles and fights hard for the European values. And Ukrainians are proving this right now with their very lives. Ukraine EU membership bid is key to further cementing democracy, human rights, dignity, equality, and the rule of law. And Ukraine is a key element of a strong Europe. Ukraine's membership bid would revive and reunify Europe and keep confidence up among the Ukrainian people to keep fighting for these very values. Today, unprecedentedly and historically, 86% of Ukrainians support EU integration. This means that the people really believe in EU institutions, in Council of Europe institutions. So let us, colleagues, with supporting the bids to enlarge the EU, continue supporting the people who so firmly believe and fight for democracy and freedom on the European continent and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Licia. Next in the debate, I call Madam Clotilda Bushka from Albania. Clotilda, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll join the congratulations of all the colleagues here for the excellent report of our rapporteur. And this is a report placed very well in this very critical situation Europe is living due to the Russian aggression to Ukraine. The Western Balkans have changed a lot over the last year, and the progress is also due to the organization like ours, which helped our countries on their way to democracy, promoting human rights and a functional rule of law. The Council of Europe is important in terms of human rights, democracy, rule of law, and plays an undeniable role when it comes to the European integration. And this has been like this since its creation in 1949. It is not by coincidence that the European Commission uses the results of some of the monitoring mechanisms of the Council of Europe as parameters to assess the progress made in the context of the enlargement process. In this context, we have always made it clear that cooperation activities or projects should be based on the country's priorities in line with the European integration process and focused on areas in which the Council of Europe has expertise. Also, in the latest document of cooperation between the European Union and the Council of Europe, the European Union confirms that it will continue to support the work of the Council in terms of the Western Balkan countries through the horizontal facility mechanisms. These mechanisms has helped indeed to make the cooperation between the two organizations in the Western Balkans more visible and efficient. Being part of the Council plays a transformative role in the country's institutions and in the society, which helps and facilitates European integration. In this context, Albania welcomes the cooperation with the European Union, which is, in our view, the Council of Europe's main institutional partner in political, legal, and financial terms. We are convinced that our organization has played an important role in the region, and my country welcomes the Council of Europe's continuing engagement and the contribution offered in order to comply with Council of Europe standards and with the European Union acquis in the framework of the enlargement process. We are committed to continue with the reforms, and we hope European Union will deliver to the expectation of Albania to hold the first intergovernmental organization conference. We have a statement here when it comes to a clear perspective for Western Balkan from Europe. When it comes to formulate recommendation to the authorities concerned, we should not create new monitoring mechanisms and add recommendation within PACE. And in this framework, we have to see how to resolve the issue of PACE monitoring, which for some states have been for long now. In short terms, we need to talk and discuss on how to avoid duplication. So the standards for human rights, rule of law, and democracy have been consolidated in the Council of Europe here with mechanisms, and European Union should really rely on that standard. We don't need to have new mechanism in order to have duplication. We need to be attentive and put this clear to all the member states in the European Union and European Union itself. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Clotilde. Now we are going to listen to our colleague Maria Valentina Martinez Ferro from Spain. Maria, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Gracias al señor Corlatian por su informe. Hoy, más importante que nunca, porque es muy necesaria la colaboración entre el Consejo de Europa y la Unión Europea. Precisamente porque estábamos equivocados cuando creíamos que los comportamientos que hoy vemos en Europa eran propios del pasado y que éramos el continente de la paz perpetua, que el apaciguamiento contendría a Putin, que la diplomacia buenista nos garantizaba la seguridad y que era bueno estar huérfanos de verdaderos referentes. Hemos visto que no hay nada más falso. Hoy vemos orgullosos el ejemplo de Volodymyr Zelensky, un líder que ha sido capaz de unir a todo su pueblo y que es una inspiración para todos los que amamos la democracia y la libertad. Las reglas del derecho internacional han sido socavadas y el mundo está amenazado por la voluntad despótica de Vladimir Putin, y la capacidad de resistencia de los ucranianos nos ha vuelto a recordar que un pueblo que quiere vivir en paz y en libertad es invencible. Todo esto es lo que defiende esta institución, el Consejo de Europa. A los europeos, a los miembros de la Unión Europea, que hemos visto que de nuevo la guerra destruye nuestro continente, nos toca ahora ayudar con todos nuestros recursos al noble pueblo de Ucrania. Y en eso esta organización tiene también un desafío para mejorar su colaboración con la Unión Europea, que es lo que quiere señalar este importante informe. Ese esfuerzo debe ser hecho también por parte de las instituciones de la Unión Europea. Cuando el ruido de las armas se detenga, será el momento en que la justicia internacional caiga sobre los culpables, sobre todos los culpables. El horror debe tener consecuencias para quien lo genera. También será el momento de ayudar a Ucrania con la reconstrucción. Pero ahora debemos ser más firmes que nunca. Es hora de ser más determinados que nunca y de estar más unidos que nunca desde el Consejo de Europa, institución que es la garantía de la defensa de los derechos humanos en el mundo, y desde la Unión Europea, que es la institución que ha hecho de la paz un proyecto político duradero de libertad y ejemplar en democracia. Por eso, el acceso de Ucrania a la Unión Europea es una oportunidad única para hacerlo. Ucrania está defendiendo los valores europeos de una forma más que ejemplar, de una forma extraordinaria y excepcional. Así que desde aquí pedimos a la Unión Europea estar a la altura de las circunstancias, y debe hacerlo también con la ayuda del Consejo de Europa. Ucrania es un importante miembro de esta organización, un ejemplar miembro de esta organización, así que defendámosla desde aquí como se merecen. No habrá mejor ejemplo para hacerlo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Maria Valentina, for your contribution. Now I call in debate Mr. Domagoj Hadjukovic from Croatia. Domagoj, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, and once again, let me congratulate you on the flawless pronunciation of my name. Dear colleagues, I think this is a timely and well-written report, although its creation started almost a lifetime ago, 2019, I believe. It's a lifetime ago when it comes to the international circumstances. And even so, 3 years later, but in much changed world, I think it's a welcome report. Thanks and congratulations to the rapporteur for a well-written report. Allow me to underline the importance of the EU Council of Europe cooperation in the context of enlargement. I personally am a staunch supporter of enlargement of the European Union, and I believe that the European project is not over until all the countries that share our values and have the ambition to join the Union are not members of the Union. It does not concern only the Western Balkans, although I do most heartedly agree with my Albanian colleagues who have stressed this, and the Serbian colleague as well. But also it relates to Ukraine, it relates to Georgia, it relates to Moldova, and any other country that may voice the ambition to join our family. I especially believe that Ukraine should be given a special relationship status with the European Union, because they are in a unique position that they have to fight for their pro-European stand and orientation. And indeed, the logic would dictate, dear colleagues, that the compliance to the Council of Europe standards should be compatible with the EU standards. For what are European Union values if not human rights, rule of law, freedom of speech, and so on, and some freedom of media, and you know all the rest. I especially wish to underline the role the European Union and this august chamber has in reversing the backsliding of democracy. Sometimes I believe, dear colleagues, that the European Union may be too lenient in this respect. We must never trade stabilocracy for democracy. I think this is a wrong course in the long run. And I'm happy and very proud to say that this august House and this institution has not been as lenient as the European Union. I think we are still needed as a kind of a watchdogs, if you would permit me that expression, of democracy. Protecting the integrity of electoral process is also a very important role we play, and we have played in the past. Therefore, I support the recommendations, and maybe as a suggestion to our colleagues to try to include the members of the European Parliament, European experts, and other resources in the European Union in our work in the committees on the reports and indeed in this chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mijatovic. I try to pronounce all names as good as possible, but we have a wide variety. But if I need to be corrected, please let me know, because I know it matters that a name is pronounced in the right way. Now I call in the debate Mr. Volker Ulrich from Germany, but I do not see him. Yes, but I do see him. He's on another place than here indicated. Volker, you have the floor.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident, meine sehr verehrten Damen und Herren. Ohne jeden Zweifel hat die Europäische Union eine Integrationstiefe wie keine andere Organisation erreicht. Und die Mehrzahl der Mitgliedstaaten im Europarat sind Mitglied in der Europäischen Union, und die Mehrzahl derjenigen, die noch nicht Mitglied sind, wollen Teil der Europäischen Union werden. Es geht heute also nicht um die Frage Europäische Union oder Europarat, sondern um die Frage, wie können Demokratie, Rechtsstaatlichkeit gemeinsam gelebt und vorangebracht werden. Und ein Blick in die Geschichte darf bei dieser Debatte nicht fehlen. In den 50er Jahren hat der Europarat die europäische Einigung angestoßen. Und während die europäischen Gemeinschaften noch ausschließlich im Bereich der Wirtschaft waren, hat der Europarat die Kraft der Freiheit, der Demokratie und der Menschenrechte betont. Und es war übrigens der Europarat, der zuerst eine europäische Hymne kreiert hat. Und die Flagge der Europäischen Union war die des Europarats. Und die Europäische Union hat diese Flagge übernommen. Und jetzt geht es darum, dass aus diesen geschichtlichen Errungenschaften wir uns der Verantwortung bewusst sind, dass die Kraft des Europarats auch in die Europäische Union wirkt und umgekehrt. Ein wichtiges Zeichen muss sein, dass wenn über die Zukunft Europas diskutiert wird, dass es nicht allein um die Europäische Union geht, sondern auch um den Europarat. Die integrative Kraft unserer Institution darf nicht vergessen werden. Und deswegen ist es wichtig, dass dort, wo Recht gesichert wird, im Bereich der Rechtsprechung, auch die Organisationen der Europäischen Union der Menschenrechtskonvention beitreten und ihr damit noch mehr Gewicht verschaffen. Diese juristische Frage darf auch nicht am Europäischen Gerichtshof in Luxemburg scheitern, sondern wir brauchen hier ein klares Commitment. Und am Ende des Tages wünsche ich mir, dass durch einen stärkeren Austausch, dass durch die Übernahmen von Konventionen durch die Europäische Union unsere Arbeit stärker gewürdigt werden, weil wir letzten Endes für Europa am gleichen Ziel arbeiten, nämlich die Herstellung von Frieden, Freiheit, Demokratie und Menschenrechten. Und deswegen vielen Dank, lieber Titus Corlatan, für diesen Bericht. Und ich empfehle Ihnen auch, ihn anzunehmen. Herzlichen Dank.
Und herzlichen Dank, lieber Volker, für Ihren Beitrag. Now the last speaker in the debate will be Madam Nigar Arpad-Daray from Azerbaijan. Madam, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Cooperation and strategic partnership between EU and Council of Europe is absolutely natural. EU is a dominant economic force in the European space, and Council of Europe is the oldest organization promoting human rights and democracy. However, in light of the fundamental changes and challenges that Europe is experiencing, it's extremely important that Council of Europe to become stronger integrated with EU institutes. Stronger EU means safer Europe, and even despite the fact that my country, Azerbaijan, is not an EU member or candidate, we clearly understand and appreciate that. But I would like to ask a question. Are we going to continue to use organizations like OSCE or Council of Europe as an extension for such organizations as EU or NATO? Or are we going into a direction where a pan-European organization like OSCE, Council of Europe, become a real platform for security and human rights in Europe, based on dialogue and principles agreed between equals? The first way, where EU and NATO dictate, means division lines and grievances. The history of Europe is unfortunately full of them. And every time such division leads to wars, be it First or Second World War, Yugoslavia, or today's war in Ukraine, division is bad for all of us. If we want a safe and peaceful Europe, the only way is a united Europe, consisting of equal members regardless of the fact if these members are EU or NATO members or not. This is what the new security architecture of Europe must look like. If we want to achieve it, at first we must admit the sad truth that today's organizations such as Council of Europe and OSCE face certain challenges in implementing their missions. They need reforms. Member states must sit at round tables as equals and must agree on the renewed mandate for the main pan-European organizations, fixing the mistakes of the past and creating working and fair tools to stand by the principles and enforce them. For 30 years, part of Azerbaijan was occupied by a neighbor, Armenia. We still struggle with consequences of the occupation, such as fully destroyed infrastructure and landmines. Technically, this occupation happened outside of EU borders, and many regarded this as far away problem. This was a wrong understanding, and failure of Europe to stop it led to many more conflicts and occupations. If we want safe Europe, we should not let it happen again, and we should vigorously work on fixing the consequences of existing occupations. We need to give new life to principles of international law, such as territorial integrity and inviolability of borders. We need to create real mechanisms to fight militarized and aggressive separatism and secessionism, which is too often used as the pretext for conflict and war in Europe. And to do it, we need stronger Council of Europe. We need stronger OSCE. Not just extensions of EU or NATO. Without undermining the importance of Lisbon principles, this important balance should be something that we won't consider in relations between EU institutes and Council of Europe. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, dear Nigar. Unfortunately, as it's now 11:50, I have to interrupt the list of speakers as we agreed earlier. However, the speeches of members on the speakers list who have been present physically or remotely during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report, provided that speakers connected remotely can report their actual presence when the debate is closed. I remind colleagues that typewritten text must be submitted electronically no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. I now call on our rapporteur, Mr. Titus Corlatian, to reply to the debate. You still have 3 minutes, dear Titus.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, chers collègues, je voudrais tout d'abord remercier tous les collègues qui sont intervenus dans le débat pour leurs commentaires, des commentaires qui effectivement ont enrichi notre débat. Je vais essayer de me concentrer sur 2 ou peut-être 3 sujets. So I will start first with, and I will share the view that this horrible war of aggression perpetrated by Russia against Ukraine fundamentally changed some serious subjects that we have in Europe. And inter alia also how many were seeing the substance of this partnership between the Council of Europe and the European Union, especially in Brussels, as a strategic partnership. And here I want to make a confession. I paid a visit in Brussels, meeting a number of members of the European Commission, high-ranking officials of the Commission, of the European Parliament, and the chief negotiator of the European Commission for the accession of EU to the European Convention of Human Rights. And I want to mention the fact that the second day of my visit, it happened just hours after the war of aggression started because of Russia against Ukraine, 24th of February. And I want to testify the fact that I saw the change and I saw very constructive and positive discussions. And I want to thank inter alia Commissioner Didier Reinders on how we share the views on how should be this strategic partnership, how we should work together in avoiding duplication, in using properly and acknowledging the historical role of the Council of Europe while establishing the standards, because historically the standards, democratic standards, were established by this House. And this is why I proposed you in the draft resolution and the draft recommendation a number of concrete proposals and recommendations. These are not theoretical proposals. They are very concrete and pragmatic proposals which are taking into account our historical acquis, our interests, the Council of Europe, but also the pragmatic interests and the views and the proposals from the European Union. This is why you will find, for instance, at the level of political exchanges between the Parliamentary Assembly and the European Parliament, not only at the level of the leadership, which is normal, but also at the level of common sessions, at the level of rapporteurs, at the level of committees, and many other concrete proposals. This is why I have tabled not only issues related to the accession of the European Union, of the European Convention of Human Rights, or the Social Charter, the issue of the Istanbul Convention, but also the mechanisms, monitoring mechanisms that we have, how to respect and to put in value correctly this expertise of the Council of Europe and many other things. The fourth summit is a proposal also associating the EU for that. A final brief comment, Mr. President, on the EU accession. Look, there is a legal obligation of the European Union that has been established by the governments of the EU. We have solved through the Protocol 14 our legal, let's say, issue to offer this possibility. I think we should express today a clear political support for the process of negotiation, because the EU governments are willing, the European Commission is supporting, the European Parliament really has a clear majority for the EU accession. Yes, we need to find concrete solutions for what some judges from Luxembourg expressed. Once again, I invite all the colleagues to support this report, and especially the follow-up will be important. We have a partner in Brussels, I must confirm this, and we should give the real substance of what should be really a strategic partnership between the Council of Europe and the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rapporteur. And indeed, times are changing and we have to be aware of that. And as you indicate, your report is about many of the issues that are at stake. Does the chairperson of the committee wish to speak? Mr. Zolt-Nemeth, you have 3 minutes, Mr. Zolt.
Thank you, President. As we have seen, the Russian aggression has rewritten this report as well. The unity of Europe is extremely important under present circumstances, and I believe that the fourth summit of heads of state and government, as the important idea of our rapporteur, is very timely. I would like to underline in the debate that we are talking about the integration of integration organizations, the EU and the Council of Europe. The Council of Europe is 100, then the European Union is 60%. We will see how close this number will come in the coming years. Hopefully, more and more Council of Europe member states might join the European Union. The enlargement and neighborhood policy have to be revised now in the European Union. Ukraine's speedy accession, underlined by many colleagues, is supported by a very broad, large country group. the artificial differentialization between neighbors and enlargement countries should be eliminated, in my opinion, and the Council of Europe should become a kind of advocate of the Western Balkans and Eastern Europe. And the EU accession to the European Convention of Human Rights is a unique possibility that our convention system should guide the European Union, not just in the social charter field, but as it was said by Elvira Kovács, the minority field as well. We have fantastic instruments like the Language Charter, the Framework Convention, and so on. We look at the national and the international community law not as systems in conflict, but systems being compatible to each other, and that's why the integration of the integration organizations is a realistic strategic perspective. Thanks to the rapporteur, thanks to the Secretariat, he has been a long-standing leader in this field, but I think the time of the wartime has given an even more important relevance to this report. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, dear Salt. This closes the debate. The Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy has presented a draft resolution to which no amendments have been tabled. We will therefore now start with the consideration of the draft resolution, and then we will consider the draft recommendation. We first will proceed now to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 15495. A simple majority is required. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting is now open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. The draft resolution is adopted. Now we will proceed to vote on the draft recommendation contained in document 15495. The vote in the hemicycle and via remote voting is now open. The vote is closed. I call for the results to be displayed. The draft recommendation is adopted and has required the two-thirds majority needed and therefore is adopted. I congratulate the rapporteur. Colleagues, I remind you that the election for the judge to the European Court of Human Rights in respect of Ukraine is underway. It will be closed at 3 o'clock. I invite those of you who did not yet vote to do so. And now we will hear the presentation of Madam Dunja Mijatovic, our Council of Europe Commissioner for Human Rights. After her address, Madam Mijatovic will take questions from the floor. It's now my pleasure to welcome Mr. Dunja Mijatovic, our Council of Europe Commissioner for Human Rights, who will present us her 2021 annual report. And I think this is one of the important reports that we get. Madam Commissioner, I would like to welcome you in our Assembly And thank you for being here with us today. During the past year, but also during the last months and weeks, you made many visits to member states. Your dialogue with the national authorities and others on securing fundamental rights, including the rights of refugees, journalists, women, children, people with disabilities, LGBTI persons, as well as those whom their rights are affected by environmental pollution, is greatly valued by the Assembly. We also appreciate your readiness to work so closely with us in the Assembly. Your views and your suggestions contribute as very fruitful guidelines to our missions and reports. You are often our eyes at the ground. As a Commissioner of Human Rights, you are already since 2018 with us, dear Dunja. You have faced many crises that have threatened or are threatening the protection of human rights on the European continent. The consequences of the migration crisis, the awful pandemic, and now the consequences of this horrible war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine pose very great challenges for the preservation and enhancement of human rights. And you are our watchdog in this respect. That is why I would like to express my gratitude to you, Madam Commissioner, and I am looking forward to hear your presentation and hear you answering the questions of the colleagues later. Madam Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Distinguished members of PACE, ladies and gentlemen, it is particularly heartening and important, and I'm very happy to see so many of you in person. But I also have to say that today I do address you with a heavy heart. And I came here today to present my annual report, and I cannot but think about the atrocious human suffering that the Russian military attack on Ukraine has caused on millions of people. My thoughts today and every day since 24th of February are with the victims of this senseless violence and with their families, with those who lost their lives and those who endured torture or ill treatment, sexual violence and abductions, with millions of those who are displaced in Ukraine or fled to safety abroad, as well as with many courageous human rights defenders, journalists, humanitarians, activists, and many others working on the ground. I have spoken with many of them in the past weeks. 10 days after the war started, we were one of the first organizations present in the field, and I visited Republic of Moldova, where I listened to the stories of dozens of people who fled the war. We went to Palanka, border with Ukraine, where there were first people arriving from different parts of Ukraine. My team and I also went to the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, Romania, and the Slovak Republic from 16th to 22nd of March, where we met with other people fleeing from Ukraine, volunteers, journalists, and human rights defenders, non-governmental organizations, as well as local, regional, and central authorities, national human rights institutions, but also members of international organizations that were present there. The rapid support given in member states of people fleeing the war in Ukraine has been extraordinary. I was impressed by the enormous efforts that we witnessed in all countries we visited. Volunteers, NGOs, religious organizations and charities, local and regional authorities, national human rights structures, border guards, fire and rescue and law enforcement services, and above all, many ordinary people have come forward to welcome people fleeing Ukraine with open arms. They continue to assist them with a selfless show of humanity and solidarity. This extraordinary mobilization has made it possible to provide emergency aid, including food and drink, medical care, psychological support, temporary accommodation, interpretation, and pro bono legal services. However, as the war in Ukraine continues to sow death and destruction, there is a need to sustain these efforts in the weeks and months to come. The governments and parliaments of all member states have a crucial role to play in this regard. They should strengthen efforts to coordinate, both at domestic and European levels, and scale up support for the response to the humanitarian and human rights needs of people fleeing Ukraine and fleeing the war in Ukraine. Sustainability of humanitarian assistance, effective integration, provision of adequate housing and schooling for children, protection of safety and dignity of people fleeing, as well as effective communication about measures taken in this respect should be ensured for a longer term. This is particularly important because in several of the member states visited, the extent to which central governments were making such medium and long-term plans remained quite unclear. In particular, access to housing, employment, financial aid and education for people fleeing Ukraine and their overall integration into society are now the most pressing concerns, I would say. People we have spoken with, they were acutely aware of these issues, so they were not denying that there is a problem, and also including how this might impact their own citizens' access to services, but concrete solutions to these problems should be devised rapidly. Consistent and positive communication from governments about persons fleeing Ukraine is also very crucial to deal with any emerging changes in attitude among the general population and to counter disinformation. There is also a need for more flexibility in providing quickly accessible funding to all those involved in assisting or hosting people fleeing the war in Ukraine to appropriately react to the changing needs, but also changing circumstances. Special attention should also be paid to the protection of specific groups of people. Most of the people fleeing the war in Ukraine are women and children. The risk of trafficking in human beings arriving from Ukraine was underscored in all countries we visited. Efforts such as registering persons offering transport and accommodation or covered police operations in the arrival points are commendable ways to cope with this problem. But this is not enough. Nevertheless, it is necessary to strengthen these efforts to prevent and combat trafficking in human beings. As I stressed at the end of my monitoring missions, the recommendations by the Council of Europe's group of experts on action against trafficking in human beings and the Lanzarote Committee should inform further action. Additionally, for many women and girls fleeing Ukraine, especially those who may have suffered conflict-related sexual violence, access to sexual and reproductive health services in some of the receiving member states is highly problematic, and this should be a particular point of attention. I will not elaborate on this at this very time, but this is something that I will continue following closely. Border control, law enforcement, and child protection authorities should also strengthen the identification and registration of unaccompanied and separated children and implement family tracing and reunification procedures for those children. This should include improving the capacities of safe places for children, in particular family-based solutions, and strengthening referral and guardianship procedures. I have also received worrying reports of Roma, LGBTI people, and people of African descent being at times treated quite differently due to deep-seated prejudices against them and having difficulties as a consequence in accessing housing, assistance, and other facilities. Turning to the situation in Ukraine, during the last 61 days of war, Ukraine has been the scene of human rights violations committed against the civilian population. The images of lifeless bodies of civilians brutally killed in the cities and villages in Ukraine render speechless. They provide a haunting illustrations of shocking reports of violations of human rights and breaches of international humanitarian law, such as summary executions, abductions, torture, sexual violence, and attacks against the civilian infrastructures committed in areas of Ukraine previously under the control of Russian troops. Too many of these violations, including those that have emerged in Bucha, Borodyanka, Kramatorsk, and Mariupol, I reacted publicly. I use this opportunity to once more warn about the dramatic situation in Mariupol. Many civilians, among them women, children, and older persons, are still trapped in the areas of Mariupol besieged by the Russian forces. For many weeks, they have been surviving under dire conditions and with scant supplies. They should immediately be provided with humanitarian corridors to enable them to evacuate to safety. This war and the blatant disregard for human life that it brings need to stop. Every effort must go into preventing more atrocities. The terrible acts committed against the civilian population may constitute war crimes and must not go unpunished. All of them must be documented and thoroughly investigated, and their perpetrators identified and brought to justice. I strongly welcome the calls for justice for the terrible acts that have been uncovered over the past weeks. I hope our member states will continue to support the Ukrainian justice system as well as the International Criminal Court so that working together they can deliver a measure of justice and reparations to the victims. As for myself, I remain ready to visit Ukraine at any moment in order to gather first-hand information on human rights violations, to listen to the people, witnesses, human rights defenders, and of course, Ukrainian authorities. I hope that it will be made possible soon. In the meantime, I will continue to monitor patterns of human rights violations and support coordinated efforts to ensure accountability, including through my regular contacts with Ukrainian authorities, institutions, and human rights defenders, and with international counterparts. All the work I have carried out on the human rights consequences of the war in Ukraine is available on my website, where a specific page was created. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished representatives, while the impact of the war on the human rights of those fleeing Ukraine and those remaining in the country has been the focus of my work in the last weeks, I have also continued to alert member states on other pressing human rights issues. One such pressing issue is the need to put an end to the long-standing, illegal, and inhumane practice of pushbacks of asylum seekers and migrants. As I stressed in the recommendation released on 7th of April, the scale and normalization of such practice at Europe's land and sea borders requires urgent and concerted action by the governments and parliamentarians. The impressive response of many European countries to the humanitarian consequences of the war in Ukraine shows that it is possible to put the protection of human dignity and the observance of international obligations at the center of state action. The same principle should apply also to the protection of refugees, asylum seekers, and migrants coming from other parts of the world. As parliamentarians, you also have the important role to play by preventing legislative attempts, but also legislation that facilitates this illegal and inhumane practice. Your role is also crucial to call governments to account and use your mandates to raise human rights violations when they occur. Another human rights problem that has remained very high on my agenda is the growing pressure on free speech and public participation in our member states. Many governments have become increasingly intolerant towards public demonstrations of dissent. Faced with multiplication of protests, authorities in several countries have taken legal and other measures that limit people's right to peaceful assembly and therefore their ability to express their views, including political ones, publicly and together with others. These measures range from harsh policing of demonstrations and bans on and dispersals of assemblies to changes in legislation aimed at increasing the possibilities of sanctioning persons organizing or participating in peaceful assemblies. I have also observed a worrying retrogression in the safety of some human rights defenders and journalists and an increasingly restrictive environment that affects their ability to work in many places in Europe. They face a variety of reprisal, including judicial harassment, prosecution, unlawful deprivation of liberty, abusive checks and surveillance, smear campaigns, threats, and intimidation. The case of Osman Kavala is sadly emblematic of these patterns of repression against human rights defenders and civil society activists. Yesterday, a Turkish court sentenced him to life in prison on baseless charges, and despite the absence of evidence that he committed a crime, this decision, as several others before, displays contempt for human rights and the rule of law by the Turkish authorities, who continue to disregard both the judgment of the European Court of Human Rights from December 2019 and the request by the Council of Europe Committee of Ministers and other institutions, including my office, to release Osman Kavala. Mr. Kavala is an innocent man who has already spent more than 4 years in prison. He is a victim of a justice system that continues to silence human rights defenders, lawyers, and journalists. He should have not been in detention in the first place. He must be released now. Worryingly, other human rights defenders and journalists in Europe are subjected to brutal repression, ranging from physical attacks, torture, ill treatment, abduction, or even killing. Furthermore, the regulatory framework governing the activities of civil society, freedom of expression, and assemblies is becoming more restrictive in a growing number of settings and contexts, creating a significant chilling effect on the legitimate exercise of a variety of human rights and freedoms. This trend must be reversed, and on this I count on you. The war in Ukraine is giving concrete significance to the so often repeated and so often neglected truth that journalists and human rights defenders play a crucial role in a democratic society. Their work uncovering human rights violations, giving a voice to victims, fighting for accountability, countering disinformation and propaganda must be valued and protected always. You can help in this regard. One concrete step would be to repeal and prevent laws that create obstacles for the work of journalists, human rights defenders, and civil society organizations. I think in particular of administrative hurdles for NGOs and also of SLAPP lawsuits. These groundless litigations are among the most hurtful tools for stifling free speech and public participation. They are often filed by powerful individuals or companies who seek to intimidate and silence journalists, activists, academics, human rights defenders, and critics in general. The simple threat of bringing such a lawsuit, including through letters sent by powerful law firms, is sometimes enough to bring about the desired effect of halting investigations, activism and reporting and violating the right to information, thus impinging on the rights of all of us. Legislation should protect freedom of expression, not undermine it. Good laws preventing slaps should at the very least meet these three requirements: allow for an early dismissal of such lawsuits, introduce measures to punish abuse, and provide practical support to those who are targeted by slaps. Both the Council of Europe and the European Union are working on specific standards to curb slaps, and I encourage you to provide your support to these initiatives and their future implementation. Another area where you can play a crucial role is the safety of journalists covering armed conflict. The war in Ukraine has provided another tragic illustration of the vulnerability of journalists in conflict situations. While it is impossible to prevent all of those risks that journalists are exposed to, states should do more to reinforce their safety. Next Monday, I will publish a human rights comment just ahead of World Press Freedom Day with recommendations addressed to member states, and I invite you to support their implementation in your country. Ladies and gentlemen, the centrality of parliamentarians in underpinning the democratic institutions of our member states cannot be overstated. Your engagement for human rights can make a concrete difference in the lives of many people. Your actions and your words are powerful tools in that sense. But they can also have very negative consequences. All too often, I have heard politicians, both in governments but also parliaments, use their positions to advance racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, misogynist, Islamophobic, or otherwise undemocratic ideas. More worryingly, in some countries, prominent politicians and public figures are fanning the flames of nationalism and willfully sowing the seeds of hate. This is all too evident in the Balkans, where inflammatory rhetoric has intensified in the past months. 30 years after the siege of my hometown, Sarajevo, such discourse should trigger an alarm and remind us all of brutality and serious violations of human rights that people indoctrinated by hateful propaganda can inflict on their fellow human beings. Instead of going down this path, politicians in Europe must exercise responsibility and lead by example in their public discourse and actions to promote peace, stability, dialogue and understanding. Instead of warmongering and spreading divisive propaganda, politicians should work towards improving interethnic relations and ensuring that everyone's rights are equally protected in the Balkans, in Ukraine, and elsewhere in Europe. I said this on other occasions, and it is worth repeating here today. The many challenges that democratic societies are facing must be addressed by giving much greater prominence to human rights for all. If more politicians take the lead and empower people to defend human rights for all, we can narrow the gap between our standards and our reality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner, dear Dunja, for your clear but also worrying and sometimes alarming report on the status of human rights. Please take a glass of water. And also thank you very much, Madam Commissioner, for your clear advices and your warnings to us parliamentarians who can make the difference in many respects when we do our work at home in our national parliaments. I recall that you have been elected by us to do this most important job, and part of the job is indeed to advise and to warn us how we could do better on the basis of your experiences. We now will have a questions from our members. We have a long list. We have half an hour left. I first will give the floor to the 5 speakers of the political groups, and then we will take as many speakers as possible. I remind everybody that there is no time for speeches, but only for questions, and it's you have 1 minute to ask the question. The first is asked by Madam Petra Bayer from Austria. She speaks on behalf of the group of the Socialists, Democrats and Greens. Petra?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mrs. Commissioner, for your report, for your recommendations, and also for your work in general. Both the questions I wanted to tackle you already mentioned. It concerned people fleeing from Ukraine. At the beginning, there was the concern that we had pushbacks of people without Ukrainian citizenship or without enjoying international protection. I want to know what exactly could we do to really protect people, displaced people fleeing without distinguishing and without be in a way racist. My second concern is about Ukrainian women who suffered from rape, sexual violence as means of war. We know that many are pregnant after a rape, and we know that many who flew, and you mentioned it, who flee to Poland have no chance to have an abortion after this rape. And I ask myself, what exactly can we do to help these women to enjoy their sexual and reproductive rights, which are part of human rights? So you see the concern as well, but what to do exactly?
Thank you, Petra. Madam Commissioner.
Thank you very much. On the first question, I would just suggest that all recommendations presented in the 7th of April report on pushbacks in Europe are implemented by member states, and then we would be in a quite different situation. As I said on many occasions, the way Ukrainian people that deserve our respect, and also the fact that, you know, arms are open of Europe in order to first of all receive, but then at the same time protect these people and give them possibility to exercise their rights in dignity. We should not forget about others. So the way we address the issue of people fleeing the war in Ukraine should be a reminder, but also alarm and a sign for all member states to do more in order to not distinguish between people of different skin color, to put it really, you know, in a basic way, or people coming from different continents. It is a tricky topic, I would say, quite controversial one, but it shouldn't be if we talk about human rights for all. So I will not go into too many details now on the pushback report, but based on several visits I have in several member states, starting already in 2018 at the beginning of my mandate, I collected quite a worrying information in a different treatment of refugees coming from different parts of the world. And this is why we issued several reports. This is the third one with the clear recommendations on how to stop this kind of discrimination, which I think is quite shameful for a European continent and for all our governments to have this kind of approach. But as I said, you know, we can elaborate on this maybe at a later stage. When it comes to rights of women and girls fleeing the war in Ukraine, I'm in touch with human rights defenders in Ukraine, several extraordinary courageous people. Also, I had a call with the General Prosecutor, Madam Benediktova. My team and myself, we have regular meetings with Madam Denisova, Ombudsperson, Human Rights Commissioner of Ukraine. And then again, we met several that are facing problems when it comes to access to sexual and reproductive rights. This should also be a sign for all the states. You mentioned Poland, but Poland is not the only country where there is a problem with the access to sexual and reproductive rights. This is a time we do not have possibility to step aside and not do everything in our power to offer these rights, so sexual and reproductive, but also psychological support and many other issues that are important for Ukrainian, but also all other women. So maybe this could be the right moment that we recognize how important it is for our member states to have a unified view on giving access to this right that is extremely important for the well-being not only of women and girls, but for all of us, for the society as a whole. And I can only assure you that I will continue paying particular attention to this problem.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Now I call for a question, Mr. Pablo Ispan from Spain, on behalf of the European People's Party. Pablo, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to ask the Commissioner if there were seeds of these brutal of genocide, brutal things that we have seen at the genocide and the rape and so on in the Ukrainian war, if there were seeds before in Russia that the alarm system didn't show. So this report doesn't show what happened after. So if the alarm system of the Assembly should be more sensible about a question that affects one of the biggest contributor of this Assembly, that was Russia, and we were blind in some times. There is also another thing that I want to ask you for, is about the difference of freedom of speech and the speech of hate. The speech of hate is not freedom of speech, and sometimes in this report, things that are hate it have a treatment as a freedom of speech. So I want you to make the difference between those two issues. Okay, thank you very much.
Madam Commissioner.
Thank you. On the first one, it is a very complex question. I mean, I can only say, you know, if we saw the real alarms and clear signs that this kind of brutality and the atrocities that we saw in Bucha and other places, of course, I'm sure as a human being, not even as a commissioner, that we would try to stop this. But I do not think it was possible to see this kind of signs. What I think we saw and neglected for a very long period of time was the fact that Russian Federation really did not comply with any of the attempts to follow the recommendations. I can talk about myself and my office. We tried absolutely everything in order to engage, to reach out, particularly after they return, after the first Parliamentary Assembly expulsion. I thought there is a hope, but there was no hope. That things became even more problematic in communicating, not to mention visiting or doing anything in order to see some worrying signals there. So in my role as a commissioner, if I understood correctly your question, I can say that I saw many worrying signs, but not the signs that they are ready to go and start killing people so brutally. So I don't know if I was understanding your question in a right way, but I'm ready also to continue discussion on this at a later stage using my own experience when working with previously with the Russian Federation. Freedom of expression and hate speech, you already answered the question. Freedom of speech is not incitement for violence or hatred of people of particular group or origin. There is a clear line, but the line, I agree with many scholars, is very thin and it's red. And if we cross it, we might also do wrong to freedom of speech. So how to do this? How to make sure we protect freedom of speech and at the same time fight something that is hate and hatred? There are many ways. There are some good laws. I think Council of Europe in general is an extraordinary organization. In a sense that there are so many tools, so many monitoring bodies in order not for the states not to cross these lines. And then the states and parliaments should make sure that the laws that are adopted do not cross the line and become really restrictive laws that are censoring information, but the laws that are protecting human rights. We had this campaign that started long ago at the Council of Europe, No Hate. So it was for promoting free speech, because any kind of speech that is affecting group of people, and I, as you know, I come from Bosnia and Herzegovina. I know what it means, when certain group of people with radio waves are used in order to invite people from particular village to come and stone people of other origin. That's not free speech. That's hate speech, that's crime, and it should be prosecuted. So on this, we can also have, a debate and a discussion, but for me, as your commissioner, it is very clear what needs to be done if we see any signs of hatred or incitement to violence.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Next question comes from Mr. Norbert Kleinwachter on behalf of the ECDA Group.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident, werte Frau Kommissarin. Sie haben ja in Ihrem Jahresbericht für 2021 betont, dass die Polizei oftmals übermäßig gewalttätig gegen Demonstranten vorgegangen ist, die gegen Covid-Maßnahmen demonstriert haben. Das war in verschiedenen Ländern des Europarats leider der Fall. Auch international hat das Aufmerksamkeit erregt. Der UN-Sonderberichterstatter für Folter, Nils Melzer, hat da das extrem gewalttätige und unverhältnismäßige Verhalten insbesondere der deutschen Polizei bei ihren Einsätzen gegen Demonstrationen kritisiert und führte seinen Bericht aus, dass die Handlungen an Folter erinnerten. Und meine Frage an Sie ist jetzt natürlich, wissen Sie über diese schwerwiegenden Tatsachen Bescheid? Würden Sie das ähnlich bewerten wie Herr Melzer? In welchen Ländern traten diese Probleme auf und wie haben Sie darauf reagiert? Haben Sie die Gespräche mit Regierungen gesucht oder wird es tatsächlich noch dringende Empfehlungen an die betroffenen Länder geben? Vielen Dank.
Madam Commissioner.
Thank you. Mr. Melcher is a good colleague and a friend, and of course we do echo each other and we cooperate and coordinate. When it comes to COVID, I think we were very active in this very difficult time, and 2 years that we spent really monitoring the situation in many member states, including what you were just referring to. There were many situations where I called for the governments in order to really do everything in order to make sure that the police does not use violence when addressing protesters. I called for more training, for more possibilities for people to express freely their views that they disagree with the government, but without using violence from either side. And there were many occasions where I raised my voice. I do not know precisely in which countries now, but there were numerous. But in order to really cover everything, I issued general recommendations on peaceful assembly, on freedom of expression during pandemic, and on many other occasions. And I, as you heard, dedicated quite a big chapter of my introduction, presenting it here to you in order to emphasize the importance of free speech and peaceful assembly. And I can only say that I will continue following this in Germany, but also in all other Council of Europe member states. But it's a very valid point.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Next question comes on behalf of the group of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats in Europe from Madam Evgenia Kravchuk from Ukraine. Evgenia?
Yes, thank you, Madam Commissioner. You've rightfully mentioned that today is the 62nd day of war, and it's not just war in Ukraine, as you said numerous times, it's a war of aggression conducted by Russian Federation. We have to name the things right. And the atrocities you mentioned are being done by Russian invaders in Ukraine. And my question is, what are your concrete plans to visit in Ukraine? I would like to kindly remind you that the Presidential Committee of PACE, together with President of PACE, were in Ukraine 3 weeks ago and had some high-scale meetings. And what concrete steps can you take after this visit, besides, of course, the statement? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Evgenia. Madam Commissioner.
Thank you very much. When it comes to terminology and the fact that the aggression comes from Russian Federation, I think I was more than clear already on the first day when the war started. That day, I think I told you also when we met, I was in Georgia, traveling to Abkhazia in order to meet IDPs when I heard that Russian Federation started bombing Kiev. And from that very moment, my opinion and my position stayed the same. Of course, the situation changed tremendously when we saw what happened in Bucha, Rodyanka, and then all other places. When it comes to my visit, I'll be very honest with you. I've been trying to visit Ukraine for the past 3 weeks. I'm in touch with Ukrainian authorities on the highest level, also from here, from the delegation. I wanted to go to Lviv, I wanted to go to Kiev. It is still not possible, but it's not something that I control. So I think you should talk to your delegation, yes, because that's, yeah. But anyway, as I said, I'm ready. I requested it, and what I'm going to do there, it also depends on the situation at that moment, and also in relation to my talks with Ukrainian authorities in Kiev. Of course, I would like to go to Bucha, Borodyanka, and to meet human rights defenders, which I think is extremely important, but hopefully this will happen very soon.
Thank you. And the last question comes from Mr. André Hunko from Germany on behalf of the Unified European Left.
Vielen Dank, Frau Menschenrechtskommissarin. Ich würde gerne 2 Fälle noch ansprechen, die hier noch nicht zur Sprache gekommen sind. Einmal Julian Assange. Er ist ja schon über 3 Jahre in einem Hochsicherheitsgefängnis in Belmarsh, in einer winzigen Zelle in schlechter Gesundheit. Und letzte Woche wurde sozusagen die Auslieferung freigegeben. Diese Versammlung hat im Januar 2020 eine sehr deutliche Position eingenommen und gesagt, diese Auslieferung muss gestoppt werden und er muss sofort freigelassen werden wegen dem Präzedenzfall, den er auch darstellt. Und Sie haben im Februar 2020 auch sich in eine ähnliche Richtung geäußert. Wie ist die Situation? Was kann man da jetzt tun? Was wären die nächsten Schritte? Das wäre vielleicht auch nächsten Montag, was Sie angesprochen haben. Und zweitens, wenn Sie kurz noch mal eingehen könnten auf den Fall Selahattin Demirtas, wo Sie ja eine Third-Party-Intervention gemacht haben vom Gerichtshof. Vielen Dank für die klaren Worte zu Kavala. Aber ich glaube, wir müssen auch Selahattin Demirtas nicht vergessen. Vielen Dank.
Madam Commissioner.
Thank you, Mr. Hunko. On Assange, you rightly stated, I was very clear, and I offered my view, just to mention it briefly, that Julian Assange should not be extradited to the US. My position stays the same. I communicated this to the UK government. I'm following closely the case. My team is in touch with many human rights defenders and NGOs working on this case in UK and elsewhere. I intend to visit UK at a certain stage, hopefully this year. And I do hope now during these several weeks we will also follow closely, because there are some things happening also on the judicial level. So I can assure you that this is something that will remain high on my agenda. When it comes to Mr. Demirtas, I'm sure you're aware that I attended a Grand Chamber hearing on Demirtas' case. So I think we are putting more than enough attention to all people that are in prison, not just in Turkey, but in other Council of Europe member states. But sometimes, I also have this feeling that we exhausted all we can do as the organization. And then my question also remains, what else can we do in order really to make sure that this practice is not something that we are facing in 21st century in Europe and in the Council of Europe. But that's maybe a bit of idealistic view. At the same time, I can only assure you that we will continue following Mr. Demirtas, Mr. Assange, Mr. Kavala, and cases of many other people that are deprived of their liberty for unknown reasons.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. Now we will take 5 questions. We still have time for 5 questions, and then you can answer them together. Prochaine question est de Monsieur François de Calvet de la France. François, 1 minute.
Bien. Alors. Monsieur le Président, Madame la Commissaire, mes chers collègues, vous évoquez dans votre rapport vos actions relatives au sort des ressortissants européens détenus dans des camps du nord-est de la Syrie, sujet éminemment sensible, touchant à la fois le droit des enfants et la sécurité nationale, qui fait l'objet de recours pendants contre la France devant la Cour européenne des droits de l'homme. Tout récemment encore, le ministre français de l'Europe et des Affaires étrangères a rappelé la doctrine française qui consiste à traiter les dossiers de rapatriement au cas par cas et uniquement pour les mineurs isolés, les orphelins et ceux dont la mère accepte le départ. Comme l'a souligné Jean-Yves Le Drian, chaque rapatriement implique des opérations qualifiées d'extrêmement dangereuses. En revanche, tout retour des adultes a formellement été exclu. Comment analysez-vous cette position des autorités françaises, notamment au regard des positions des autres États membres de notre organisation concernés par cette problématique? Vos actions ont-elles porté sur des principes généraux ou ont-elles permis d'obtenir des résultats pour certains enfants en particulier? Je vous remercie.
Merci. We now take first the question of Mr. Ruben Rubinian from Armenia. Ruben, 1 minute.
Thank you. Madam Commissioner, in your annual report, there is a reference to your memorandum on the humanitarian consequences of the war in Nagorno-Karabakh. In the document, you raised concerns, among others, regarding the human rights of the Armenian prisoners of war and detainees in Azerbaijan, and called that all these captives should be released without delay, as there are numerous facts that these prisoners are subjected to inhuman treatment and torture in detention. Please inform us about your further steps regarding this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. I do not see Suna Evasdottir in the room, so the next question goes to Madam Zita Gomay from Hungary. Zita, 1 minute.
Oops. Sorry. I was not prepared yet. Anyway, it's a great privilege to see you, dear Commissioner. And I just would like to make comments, some comments on your report to talk about marginalized group, minorities and people living in poverty who has substantially increased chance to become victims of modern day of slavery and other forms of exploitation. And even before the coronavirus pandemic, data has shown that labor-related human trafficking is increasing throughout Europe. It also has shown these groups have higher chance of becoming victims of sexual trafficking, with children being especially endangered. Your report highlights very well the persistence of violence against women and girls, the negative impact of 2021 had on children, on immigrants, on women, and on the LGBTIQ people, and notes that trend undermining human rights protection have continued in 2021. Based on your report on 2021 and seeing the deterioration of human rights protection, how well do you think this current crisis can be managed, and how well the dangers to these refugees will be prevented? Thank you very much for your great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Zita. The fourth question comes from our colleague John Howell from the United Kingdom. John, 1 minute.
Thank you. Madam Commissioner, you were very clear in your attitude about Osman Kavala. Today, the Monitoring Committee has postponed its visit to Turkey on the advice of myself as the rapporteur for Turkey and my colleague on that. Is there anything more that we can do?
Thank you, John. And the last question before I give you the floor, Madam Commissioner, comes from Mr. Reinhold Lopatka from Austria. Reinhold, 1 minute.
Thank you. Very brief. In your report, you mentioned some letters you sent to the Russian Federation, to the Minister of Interior, or to the Prosecutor General of the Russian Federation. And we had more than 6,000 applications in the year 2021. Now the Russian people lost all these opportunities. My concrete question is, what can you do in this situation for the people in Russia, for people who are fighting for human rights and for the civil society? Thank you.
5 questions, Madam Commissioner, and you have 7 minutes.
Thank you. The first question comes from the distinguished members of the French Parliament, and it's related to Syrian camps and my call, and also third-party intervention calling for repatriation. Of course, I'm following the situation of certain steps that France, but also other member states are doing in relation to this situation. My point here is that these children are our children. Children are not guilty because of certain actions of their parents. People are dying in those camps as we speak. Of course, I do see the reality, and I do recognize how important it is to think of security and safety of our citizens. It's absolutely a must. But the governments should find a way, working with the UN, with other organizations that are trying to help in order to repatriate these children and women. I know that France has a stance to deal with this on case-by-case basis. There are certain countries that are doing it differently, but it has to be done. We cannot leave them there without also possibility to try them at the courts, at the national courts, in order to find some justice, or at least to have an attempt to serve some justice to the victims of terrorism. But leaving them there and not repatriating them can be a huge problem. Of course, I'm waiting to see the decision by the European Court of Human Rights, and I will continue raising this, but I again repeat, those children are children that should not be neglected. And we should really make sure, if we talk about human rights for all, also in the cases that are controversial and sensitive, we need to show humanity. From the distinguished member of Armenian Parliament, when it comes to my memorandum, of course, my first wish was to travel to Nagorno-Karabakh. I wanted to go there when the trilateral agreement was signed, and I was also waiting to see what will happen with UNHCR. That is the first, the only, actually, organization that is mentioned in a trilateral agreement for being able to go there. I know that they are still not able to do this. And then I decided to offer my recommendations looking at the issues of transitional justice, on all these things that the Council of Europe is good at, missing persons, and many other issues that are related to this conflict. My next steps are also working with both governments. I've made several statements in relation to the issues very much related to the reconciliation and truth and dignity, because this can only be done if there is a respect and understanding that there is a need to move forward. And I'm ready to engage with both authorities, but I can still really say that there are no signs of the possibility for the international organizations to travel in order to do their human rights work. But regardless of this, we will continue looking at all these issues and all these cases with the authorities and civil society present in both countries. Zita, thank you for mentioning this extremely important topic. As I already said, I will not elaborate too much on this today, because we are still collecting information, and we are really trying to pick up, in a way, the brain of many that are engaging with this issue. The good thing is that I think we started doing it on time, so we are not neglecting it and then addressing it later on. We have means, we have tools, but we also need political will. We need good laws. We need politicians that are ready with the courage, with the wisdom, in order to recognize why it is important to make sure that sexual and reproductive rights are put at the highest level of their discussions. I can only assure you that together with you and many other members of PACE, I will continue raising it and doing everything we can. But as I said already, maybe now is the moment that we become more vocal, in order to, not only vocal, but more determined to help Ukrainian women, that this is also a possibility to help all others in many other Council of Europe member states. On Kavala, what else can be done? We should not give up or give in, we should continue. I did everything I could. I have always had a very good cooperation with the Turkish authority. I always had very open door policy with Turkish authorities. I had a great assistance in all my visits. I even visited Mr. Kavala in prison, and it was with the help of Turkish authority. I met the highest level of government in the country, here in Strasbourg and elsewhere. I met his family, his lawyers. I used third-party intervention before the European Court of Human Rights. I used the possibility for the execution of judgments, so-called Rule 9. I extended all possible means and tools I have at my disposal. Regardless, my position stays the same. We should continue engagement, and we should continue working with the Turkish authorities in order to make sure that Mr. Kavala and many others are free, and there is a change of policy or the approach. It is urgently needed. So my plea would be engage, engage, engage even more. To distinguished members of the Austrian Parliament, in relation to Russia, yes, of course, we had to put it in our annual report because those exchanges happened before expulsion of the Russian Federation from our organization. I can only tell you it's difficult, but when it comes to the authorities, of course, you know, I do not intend, and I do not have means. And then, you know, the question would be, what can I do? Because, you know, the mandate is clear. It is for the member states of the Council of Europe. Regardless of that, there is a Committee of Ministers resolution on Council of Europe working with the civil society of Russian Federation. When it comes to people in the country, it's very difficult. Of course, we can have online meetings. There are some extraordinary people, some people that were always vocal and never accepted that Crimea is annexed, that Donbass and Luhansk are part of Russian Federation. They still live in Moscow. Not too many, but they are there. We should not forget about them. There are many that left and found their place of sort of safety. Many people from TV Dozhd, Novaya Gazeta, and many other, Echo Moscow, and many other independent media that do not exist anymore in Russian Federation. With many I met in Prague. I know that Vilnius is also a place where they found a possibility to do their work. Tbilisi, Yerevan, Istanbul, and we should not forget about them. How we will do this as the Council of Europe is still difficult to say, but what I can say as a Commissioner for Human Rights, of course, there is a need to continue discussions and to build bridges for future. But we also need to be very careful that we really know that we are discussing it with people that have very clear views on what it means to live in democracy and what it means to live in a country where human rights are respected.
Thank you very much, Madam Commissioner. And now I have to interrupt the list of speakers. There were many more who wanted to ask questions, but be aware, dear colleagues, our Commissioner is very approachable. So if you have questions, advices, suggestions, her office is always open. So take care of for that. Madam Commissioner, may I thank you very much for all the good work that you are doing. As I said earlier, we have elected you, and I think that you deserve an applause from our side for all the good work that you are doing. Thank you very much. Colleagues, I remind you that the election for the judge to the European Court of Human Rights in respect of Ukraine is underway. It will be closed at 3 o'clock. I invite those of you who did not yet vote to do so. The Assembly will hold its next public sitting this afternoon at 3:30 p.m. with the agenda which was approved Monday. The sitting is adjourned.
This was a long